I'm in the corner. I'm in the corner.
Good morning to all of you, and a very big welcome on behalf of ACTRAV to this symposium on the future of work we want. We really appreciate you having taken your time to take part and your interest in the event. Just to make sure that the technicalities are all there, we have simultaneous interpretation in English, French, and Spanish. So if there's something that is not working, let us know.
Arabic as well.
I am Maria Elena André, the director of ACTRAV, and on my right I have Deborah Greenfield, the DDG for policy in the ILO, so the Deputy Director General, and between the two of us we're going to make some opening remarks to our symposium. Most of you know that in 2019 the ILO will commemorate its 100th anniversary, and that in the run-up to this celebration the ILO has launched the 7 centenary initiatives in order to prepare the organization for successfully addressing its mandate for social justice. The 7 initiatives cover the future of work, the end of poverty, women at work, green jobs, standards, enterprises, and governance. So all areas of great relevance and great importance. And we have picked the Future of Work initiative, which is the one that is bringing us all together today. And the way we see it is how can we put forward responses to the profound changes that have been increasingly taking place in the world of work over the last few decades. And this is something that we see across the globe, both in developed and developing countries. And the Director General, when he came up with a proposal for the Centenary Initiative on the Future of Work, has proposed a 3-stage implementation plan. The centenary conversations that have already taken place in different countries across the globe. The setting up of a high-level commission that is going to start its work next Saturday. And then the final discussion that should take place at the 108th session of the International Labour Conference in 2019, and its conclusions, because that's going to be the bottom line of the whole exercise, the conclusions that should, as much as possible, provide concrete guidance on ILO's work as the organization enters into its 2nd century of existence. And the centenary conversations were organized around 4 dialogues: work and society, decent work for all, the organization of work and production, and the governance of work. And these dialogues were organized at national level among the tripartite constituents, international organizations, research institutions, universities, NGOs, and governments. So, in these national dialogues, workers' organizations took part in many of these, but the degrees of involvement and engagement have been different, depending on the countries we are talking about. And in ACTRAV, as part of our work program for the current biennium, we have included the organization of 5 regional conferences in the Americas, in Asia-Pacific, in Europe and Central Asia, in the Arab states, and in sub-Saharan Africa. And the aim of these regional conferences was multiple. The first one, an invitation to contribute to the Centenary Initiative and to involve workers' organizations in the discussions from the outset, and at the same time to have this discussion with academics, employers, and government representatives. Second aim, to take a step back from the day-to-day activities of trade union organizations and to examine the larger macroeconomic and social developments that influence the world of work, not just from a national but also from a regional and an international perspective. Third was to fully grasp these developments and the ongoing structural transformations from a worker's perspective. Because it's important that there is a workers' perspective on this whole debate. The fourth was to assist in the construction of effective policy responses, taking into consideration on every response the gender perspective, which we find being fundamental in the debates on the future of work, but also policy responses that need to take into consideration the risks and the challenges that affect workers and their organizations. And the fifth, I could go on, but I've selected these five, to discuss also how these changes affect workers' organizations themselves and what new strategies need to be put in place to represent workers today in the labor market, but also those that will come in the labor market in the future. And so we were successful in the format that we have used for the regional conferences, and that's the reason why we have sort of copied that format to what we're going to do today, also with the small nuance that we have added two special dialogues. In some of the regional conferences, we had these special dialogues, not in all of them. One special dialogue on the need to set up a future that fits everyone and what is the role of politics and politicians in that regard. And the second special dialogue, and this has been done throughout the different regional conferences, how do we handle the Agenda 2030? And how does this fit in the debate on the future of work? And how can we use the Agenda 2030 as a way to promote a future of work that is based on sustainable and inclusive development in a global context of conjunctural and structural changes at the same time? So as I said, we have kept the same format. We're bringing together those of you, and I would like to thank you all for having accepted to take a part of your time to take part in this event, because we're bringing together renowned individuals from across the globe, but people that have been thinking about these issues, and again, in their different capacities. We've got trade union leaders in the room, we've got business representatives, we've got government officials, we've got political leaders, we've got scholars, we've got experts, so I think we've got a good mix in order to have a very good and lively discussion. And as you will see, as the program unfolds, practically all those present in this room will have a role to play in each one of the panel discussions that we're going to have throughout the coming days. And I also have to say that this model departs from what have been the traditional symposia organized by ACTRAV with a much larger audience, but the aim here is really to promote a real dialogue. And you cannot promote a real dialogue if you have a room with 100 people. It's very difficult. And also to draw guidance out of that dialogue for the necessary follow-up actions and discussions that will have to take place. So in the dialogues, we will be looking at the main drivers of economic growth and human development that influence positively and negatively at the same time the recent trends in the world of work and also their complex and interrelated relationships. We'll be asking ourselves a series of questions. Is the current model of globalization still fit for purpose? This model has led, yes, to a greater convergence between developed and emerging countries, but at the same time it has been unable to share equally the gains of this increased economic integration, and it has led to higher levels of inequality, and that's the situation we are confronted with today at the global level. So how can we move away from the current economic model of many emerging countries, and we have found that in the regional conferences, an economic model that is mostly based on exporting basic commodities and a few extractive sectors towards a broader economic development, an economic development that creates high-quality jobs, increases internal demand, and benefits all in the society. Also, what are the limits of technological change and how to address the declining labor shares that it provokes in many countries? The downwards pressures that is being put on wages, the growing polarization of the workforce, or the emergence of the gig economy leading to a disruption of the employment relationship. How to address the environmental degradation and its negative impact on the world of work, people, and the planet. How to handle different demographic trends that we observe across the globe. And in some, we have seen a rapid population growth. In others, we see the aging of the population. And as a result of that, we see a growing number of people that are forced to move inside their own countries, outside their own countries, between regions, and also in between continents, bringing labor migration and mobility to the front of the political debate, and how is going this to influence the future of work. How to address the issues related to the quantity and the quality of jobs in the world economy that has got more than 50% of its workforce in the informal economy and a growing number of workers in non-standard forms of work. And how does this impact on the quality of our democracies? How this impact on the role of the tripartite constituents, the importance of tripartism and social dialogue, and of course, the role and the place of workers' organizations into all this. And last but not least, what role for the ILO? Where do our standards fit into this debate? What's going to be the future in that regard? What's going to be the future of the norm? What's the balance between the norm and the collective solution of the issues and the challenges? And I would just like to remind ourselves of what the DG, the Director General of the ILO, said at the closing session of the Global Dialogue on the Future of Work We Want, that was held in early April at the ILO headquarters. And at that moment, Guy Ryder insisted on the need to promote innovation and development while upholding the social objectives of the organization. And he said, and I quote, "The future of work must be inspired by considerations of humanity, of social peace, of social justice and peace. If it is not, we are going to a dark place. We are going to a dangerous place." End of quote. And he has called on the global community to make sure dialogue between governments and the social partners is a key instrument for building a world of work that leaves no one behind. So I think we have all the ingredients to have a good menu and a good discussion. And I'm sure this is going to be a very successful conference, and I hope that all of you in this room enjoy it and take something important out of it, but also help us construct a joint global agenda on how to address the challenges around the future of work. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would now like to give the floor to Deborah Greenfield. Deborah, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Maria-Elena, for the invitation to join you today. And good morning and welcome, colleagues from around the world and from our tripartite constituents. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to talk with you today. Maria-Elena asked me to talk to you about the ILO's Future of Work initiative. And so I'm going to fill in some of the details of our three-phase initiative, and I'm going to start where Maria-Elena left off in her quote from the DG. So I want to set the stage first for our Future of Work initiative. Our Future of Work initiative is situated squarely within the ILO's mandate for social justice. The question that we ask ourselves throughout the Future of Work initiative is, as we enter our second century, as we see rapidly changing events in the workplace, what is the role, the institutional role of the ILO within the frame of achieving social justice in order to achieve lasting peace? That was our mandate in 1919. That mandate isn't going to change simply because we're starting the next 100 years of our working life. And it's not going to change because we see so many changes in the world of work. In fact, the challenge for us is to meet those changes in a meaningful way through working on to achieve social justice. Let me say, second, that the ILO was one of the first, if not the first, global institution to say, look, we have to start dealing with the future of work. So we started our initiative almost 3 years ago. Wherever I go today, the topic du jour is future of work. But we always have to remind ourselves as the ILO that we own a large piece of this debate because of how we situate ourselves in it. That is, we have the authority of our tripartite structure in answering the difficult questions about the future of work, in challenging ourselves to come up with sustainable solutions, and in challenging the world to expand its view of what the future of work is all about. Wherever I go to talk about the future of work, and I know wherever the DG goes and wherever many people in the ILO go, the topic is technology. Now, technology is a hugely important driver of the future of work, but it is only one driver, and I actually like to think of it as a tool more than a driver. That is, we own technology, we create technology, and how we use technology is really a question of policy choices. So there's nothing inevitable about what technology will do other than it will keep evolving. We've seen other industrial/technological revolutions, and the policies we put in place in the workplace are really what help us bear the fruits or the burdens of technological innovation. And we keep this in our minds all the time as we talk about the future of work and try to widen the space and make it into more of a policy debate rather than a debate about how many jobs will be created or destroyed, what's the net gain, what's the net loss. So let me just talk a little bit more about the three phases of the Future of Work initiative. When the Director General introduced the Future of Work Centenary Initiative in a report to conference, he outlined, as Maria Elena said, 4 conversations that helped him frame the issues for the ILO. And they have served us well as we've gone out into the larger community and tried to have a meaningful debate among our tripartite constituents, as well as internally, about the future of work. The first conversation or theme is work and society. And the question there is, knowing what work means to individuals and to community now, knowing how the ILO Constitution frames work as a way in which individuals achieve meaning and dignity in their lives, what will happen to that meaning as work evolves, and how can work continue to have the same meaning for individuals and community? The second conversation or theme is decent work for all. In that conversation, we talk about where the jobs will come from and what they'll look like. And here we try to really emphasize that there are macroeconomic issues that affect and that will help drive the answers to this question. The third theme or discussion, conversation, is the organization of work and production. We know that there are major developments in the way in which work is organized. We talk quite a bit at the ILO, for example, about global supply chains. We talk about standard forms of employment and, in contrast, non-standard forms of employment. At the same time, and so we see the evolution of work, and yet at the same time, we see persistent informality, which is the basic form of work in many countries. And so what will work look like? Finally, and in some ways this is the punchline question, the governance of work. What are the policies and the institutions, labor market institutions, other public policies that need to be put in place so that the goal of decent work is achieved? And a huge aspect of this question is, what will employers' organizations and workers' organizations need to do to continue their role as the representative organizations of workers and employers respectively. So, as Maria Elena said, within this context in which the future of work for us is a global issue, it's a normative issue, it's an economic issue, and it's also a philosophical and a very practical issue, we began with national dialogues in 110 of our member states. And these dialogues, which were tripartite, are, I think, significant achievements for at least two reasons. One is, of course, that every single national dialogue was tripartite. And so the dialogues mirror the ILO's unique structure and our unique lens on the world of work. They have an authoritative quality to them because they embody social dialogue that no other discussions about the future of work have. Second, the dialogues occurred in countries across the globe, and I think this is most significant in countries at very different levels of economic development. So you have countries, you have least developed countries, you have, I'll just pick from the list. We had discussions in Nepal, Mauritania, Sudan, Tanzania, Yemen. We had discussions in Ghana, India, Paraguay, Swaziland, Vietnam, all the way through to upper middle income and upper income countries, Argentina, Brazil, Lebanon, Jordan, South Africa, Denmark, the US, the Netherlands, Norway. I mean, I could go on. But the fact that we were able to mobilize our members, which to have these dialogues in a tripartite way, means that we have a lens on the world of work. We have information about what concerns our member states that is truly unique. Now, we've synthesized these dialogues into our synthesis report, which is available to you. If you can't find it on the web, let me know, and I'll make sure that it's there. But we did not script the dialogues. That is, we didn't say follow the 4 conversations. We wanted to hear from our member states, from our constituents. And because of that, the topics were incredibly wide-ranging. Corporate social responsibility, job creation, fundamental principles and rights at work, global supply chains, the knowledge society, and increased inequality. I'm just picking out some themes from the synthesis report. And I really commend the synthesis report to you as you see that some of the challenges that confront all of us are the challenges we see today. So while in some countries the conversation steered more towards the technological changes that we're seeing, in other countries the question was, okay, that's out there, but how do we bring that back to unemployment, to the questions about youth that we have? So that was our first chapter in Future of Work. The second one, as Maria Elena said, is the Global Commission on the Future of Work, which holds its first meeting this weekend. The commission is composed of 28 people who are on the commission in their individual capacity, but it's not the ILO's tripartite structure that's governing the structure of this committee. Rather, the DG really sought very broad input among a wide range of experts from NGOs, the private sector, governments, academia, to come together in their individual capacities and to delve into, over the course of a year, themes that they will decide on to help steer us within our mandate for social justice into the next century. They will give us principles, guidance, guideposts to reinvigorate our work and to make our work more responsive, more directly related to the challenges that we see in the world of work. We're very fortunate to have a prime minister and a president who are active co-chairs of our commission, the prime minister of Sweden and the president of Mauritius. We're very much looking forward to our first meeting. We have put in front of the Global Commission another report that I would also ask you to look at, and that is the Inception Report. So this is our foundational report to the Commission to just provide a lens, a basis for the in-depth conversation that the Commission will have over the course of the year. We start out with the mega trends that we see in the world of work. And so that includes, of course, technology, but it includes demographics, women in the workplace, the rise of inequality, the status of informality, many of the big trends that we see that are sort of the floor, the foundational fabric of any discussion on the future of work. And then we go through the 4 conversations and talk about major themes that we see in the world of work today. But what we've emphasized to the Commission and what I know our co-chairs are very insistent on is that we're not prescribing what the Commission needs to look at. The Commission understands our mission, understands our mandate, but the Commission, through its own expertise coming together, will decide what themes it wants to pursue over the course of the next year or so. And we will assist the Commission through our technical work in providing evidence and analysis that helps those discussions. The Commission will meet, will have 4 sessions. In between those sessions, it is possible, but we don't know yet, that there might be subgroup meetings of the Commission or other ways in which members of the Commission ply their trade, so to speak, their expertise in smaller groups to have a more in-depth discussion. One of the questions that we get all the time from our member states is, okay, we had the national dialogues, now the Commission is going to meet, where are we over the next year or so? And the answer is that we are going to be, with the Commission's guidance, trying to develop communication channels between our member states and the Commission, whether that happens through regional hearings or meetings about a particular topic. We're not sure yet because we're leaving this to the Commission to give us some guidance, but we will actively work with our member states, and that means the tripartite partners in our member states, to hook them up with the work that the Commission is doing and to allow them to feed into the Commission's work. As I said, so the Commission's final product will be what we're just calling a final report, which will be, we think, a rather short, direct, action-oriented document that helps to guide the ILO as we move forward. So I don't know at this point whether it will be policy recommendations, action plans, simply guideposts, but it will speak both to the ILO and to policymakers across the globe about the conjunction of the future of work and the achievement of decent work. Let me just conclude by saying that one of the things that we have, that I hear all the time when I do go and talk about the future of work is certain themes that I think are important that I suspect the Global Commission will also find important. We've already talked about the widening inequality in country, the widening inequality and gap between the rich and poor within enterprises. This has now become a macroeconomic issue around the globe, and one that we've been talking about for a long time, but for various reasons, not necessarily for the same reasons as the ILO is concerned about it. This has become a major concern among our multilateral partners and other international organizations, as well as countries themselves. Now, I think it's connected to a growing realization that, in fact, it's not just that people feel that they've been left behind by globalization, but in fact they have. And so you can debate how much of this is due to technology and how much of this is due to globalization, to the trade regime. But the reality is that with widening inequality, with a declining labor income share, the world is now worried about what happens next. I think it's also motivated by what we see as political populism across the globe. Connected to that are, I think, two important drivers. One is the persistence of informality, and the other is really the yawning gap between male and female labor force participation. We hear a lot about this in the fora that we go to, but not enough, and not as an integrated theme and an integrated challenge that we have. I'll just end by saying two themes that I don't hear very much about. One is climate change. I don't see policymakers integrating the challenges of climate change with the challenges of the future of work. You don't hear talk about a just transition. You don't really hear much about the ways in which climate change are affecting inequality, migration, and all the other issues that we know climate change is impacting. I also don't hear a lot about what we at the ILO talk of as the enabling environment for sustainable enterprises, which is a key issue in the future of work. We hear a lot about entrepreneurship, absolutely important, but we hear it as everybody will become a technological entrepreneur. All we need to do is skill everybody up, and our problems will be solved. And we know how difficult the whole issue of skills is. We also know how difficult the issues are around entrepreneurship, but we simply don't hear enough about what we need to do to make sure that that the enterprise environment is conducive to decent work. So we're hoping that in our Future of Work initiative, we have an opportunity to pursue this as well. I think I will stop here, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I think you have given us food for thought regarding some of the topics that I'm sure will be taken up in the course of our discussions. And unfortunately, we don't have the time to open up room for a discussion at this stage, but I'm sure that many of the aspects you have touched upon will come back in the course of our discussion. So thank you very much for being with us. We'll be in touch on the follow-up. Now, some technical information and a call for the three members of the next panel to come and sit by me. And in the meantime, I will just tell you what we would like to inform you about. Some of you will be interviewed in the course of these coming days by our communication officer, Mamadou. Mamadou is there. Can you raise your hand? So Mamadou will come to some of you asking you for interviews. At the same time, I would also like to say that both the interviews and any documents that you want to leave us with and the documents that will result from this discussion are going to be available in the ILO's ACTRAV website. Also that you can follow the discussions via Twitter, and then you have to use hashtag ILO FOW, as you can see on the screen. It's there. And also that there is an ILO public Wi-Fi connection for internet. You can find easily this connection. And then finally, if you have any other questions, my colleagues at the entrance will be happy to give you support. Now, we're going to move into what I consider is probably going to be one of the most exciting points for discussion at our symposium, and that is our special dialogue on how we set a future that fits everyone, and what's the role of politics in all this. Is it the old role? Is it a new role? I think that's part of the discussions that we would like to ask. So it's for me a big pleasure to facilitate this very important dialogue in our symposium. And I would like to welcome the three participants at this symposium. Professor Maria João Rodrigues on my right-hand side. She's a member of the European Parliament. She's a former Minister for Employment in Portugal. During several years, she has been a special advisor to the European Commission and to various presidencies of the European Union. She was key in what some of you would know as the Lisbon strategy in the early 2000s. She's an university professor, and she has also had a lot to do with the ILO. She was, at a certain moment of our life, the general rapporteur for the ILO Global Employment Forum back in 2001. And I'm going to stop here because Maria João has done a lot of many other things, and I'm very happy that she's found the time in a very hectic moment when there is the whole debate at European level on the social pillar to share with us a few minutes of her time. I'm also very pleased to welcome Sharon Burrow. I don't think she needs any sort of special introduction in this forum. But Sharon is the General Secretary of the ITUC since 2010, the first woman General Secretary of an international or an European trade union confederation. Before that, she was the President of the Australian Council of Trade Unions and the President of the Australian Education Union. A fighter for many years, and she will continue to be a fighter for many years more. She has been a defender of the promotion of rights at work, and also, I would say, the mother of the paid parental leave policy in Australia. And I think those are two small things in the very big trade union career that she has been developing both at the national and at the international level. And then last but not least, I would also like to welcome Mr. Nelson Lustaunau, and the Secretary of the Ministry of Labour and Social Security in Uruguay. Mr. Lustaunau has a vast career and experience also in the areas linked with employment and social security, collective conflicts, wage councils. He has occupied the post of minister under President Mujica, and is also a scholar and has written a great number of articles in these areas. So I think we have a great combination on this side of the table. And with a member of a parliament, and in this case the European Parliament, a trade union leader, a representative of a national government, we have three eminent persons that are going to share with us their views on how politics and politicians are looking at the uncertainties and the challenges that characterize the world today, including, of course, the world of work, because that's what brings us all together here in this room. And I would like to start launching this debate by something that President Mujica, the former president of Uruguay, told some time ago. And he said that the world is experiencing a deep political crisis, very much resulting from the lack of capacity of political leaders to govern globalization. He also said that there are many issues that need to be dealt with at the global level and with a clear long-term strategy in place, and yet politicians and decision makers have a very short-term view. They only look at the next election, and often they're unable to look beyond their single and pure national interest. So I would like us, on this part of the table, of the room, to put this statement into perspective and to link this statement with what brings us here today. And I would like to ask our speakers to elaborate on the big challenges that we are observing in the world of work, and how can these challenges help build not just the future of work we want, but also and especially a future of work where no one is left behind, because that's the big challenge of this whole debate. How can we make sure that inclusiveness, togetherness, justice, dignity are at the basis of everyone being part of the way we are moving all together forward? The second area that I would like us to think about is how do we shape a future of work where social policies and people citizens, workers, are put back at the heart of the development model, and where social politics have the same importance as macroeconomic politics, as economic policies, or sustainable development policies. And then the third thing I would like you to elaborate on this first round is the future of work needs to answer to the aspirations and to the needs of each and every person. And at its heart, it has got to have, as we said, the reduction of inequalities and the promotion of social justice, the rule of law also at the same time. So how do we achieve that? How, in a nutshell, do we achieve progress for everyone? And progress for everyone means the whole society. How, from your point of view, is politics and how are trade unions entering into this reflection, but also what do they do from a very practical point of view? I would like to start with you, Maria João, please.
Good morning, everybody. This is really a pleasure to join again ILO work. And let me tell you that when my good friend Hélène André sent me this invitation to come in to speak about politics, I found the perspective really interesting. So let me tell you how I will make my first reaction to the questions proposed by Elena. First of all, I like the sentence saying that in order to cope with challenges, we need to update our policies, but behind that we have the role of politics. So this is the topic of this thing. And there is a good sentence saying that policies are a kind of frozen politics. This means behind each innovation in public policies, you do have an exciting story of politics. So let me tell you something about the politics behind the policies. I will build on my own experience of different episodes of politics behind policies. And let me tell you that after several episodes, I draw some lessons from myself. So let me identify the lessons. Of course, the first one is we need to have a full vision on the challenges ahead of us, whatever they are, even when they are extremely difficult. We need to start from reality as it is. The second one is when it comes our common objectives of decent work, more and better jobs, better way of life for all, nobody left behind. To meet these challenges, we need to update social standards, but this is not enough, clearly not enough, because we need to change social policies, economic policies, and fiscal policies. This is a lesson I got for myself. If I'm not able to change all these, you cannot really sustain better social standards. Even the norm, the rules are really necessary, but we need all the rest. I just mentioned this. The third lesson I got for me is about governance. I think this is great to start from the possible role to be played by social partners. Why? Because social partners are really on the ground at all levels. They have a unique knowledge, expertise about what is really happening. They deal with all the challenges at the same time. And therefore, whenever we can have negotiating solutions, it's always better. So social partners do have a unique role because of that. Then we have the role of public policies. And I think public policies are also fundamental, but they should start from the outcomes of the social dialogue. Politicians, they always need to listen to social partners. Very important. And to give value to social dialogue. When it comes to governance, we need to involve, when it comes public politicians, those who work on social policy, but also those who work on economic policy and fiscal policy, for the reasons I told you at the beginning. Because we need to have a comprehensive solution. And we need, example, to engage finance ministers to work in order to update and improve social standards, for sure. This is an issue for Minister of Finance also. My fourth lesson is the need to go multi-level, to act at local, national, macro-regional, and international. And this is now particularly important where we are meeting, as Deborah was referring to, a new political landscape with actors arguing that at the end of the day it's better to go back to national borders in order to protect people. This kind of speech, which from my viewpoint is not only populist, but is a kind of nationalistic speech we had already in the past, in the history of the planet, this is, I believe, a big illusion, and dangerous, in fact. A big illusion because it's impossible to improve people's social standards if we just act at national level. We do need international cooperation. We do need multilateral system acting. That's why ILO is so important in the framework of the United Nations system. We do need this. And I think we should be very blunt on this whenever we meet actors saying, no, we no longer need all these. Let's go to national borders, and that's all. So I'm not mentioning names, but you know what I'm thinking about, okay? As I'm a member of the European Parliament, I can say whatever I want, you know. This is a privilege, but that's enough. You understand what I'm telling about. My sixth lesson is, even if you have all these in place, so to have a full vision of the challenges, a large scope on the policies to be involved, all the actors playing at all levels. Imagine that we have all these. This is not enough to make effective politics. At the end of the day, we do need to have a good networking of the key actors working together, an informal network. And the informal network needs to be shaped according to the objective. Okay? Now, because I know that I need to be very brief, let me just say that this kind of approach, I could develop this approach by going through many episodes of social policy. And Elena was with me in several of them, but very telegraphic. First episode was to introduce the employment strategy in the European Union, when there was no idea about that. The argument is that employment is for just member states to deal with. So we start with cooperation, multilateral, in fact, European cooperation on this. The second was to conclude that employment strategy is not enough. We need to change economic policy and fiscal policy. This was the purpose of the Lisbon strategy, taking the high road for competitiveness, saying, okay, competitiveness, but never with the choice of cutting wages or social protection. On the contrary, we need to have social cohesion and better standards. This was a second episode. Third was going through the crisis, the financial crisis, and resisting to the trend we were confronted with, which was to sacrifice everything, economic, social standards, to the sake of fiscal consolidation, and in fact saving banks. This happened for many years. Now I consider that in Europe we are starting to turn the tide, for a simple reason that we said we need to also to invest in the future, to invest in people. and that's why our economic and fiscal policy, they need to change. And now I'm jumping on now, what is happening now. Let me just refer to the European experience again, but I think this can give ideas to other parts of the world. Because I have in mind when we work together with ILO on the Global Jobs Pact and, of course, the Decent Labor Agenda. Europe is, as you know, a strong pillar in favor of this and must remain. But now you should know that right now, European Union is engaged in updating its European social model with a big political operation called European Pillar of Social Rights. And let me conclude with this. I was the rapporteur in the European Parliament for this. Right now, today, I'm in negotiation with the Council of Ministers and the Commission to shape this pillar, which should be proclaimed, if things go well, on next 17th of November in Gothenburg Summit, under the leadership of the Swedish Prime Minister. So, small world. Let me tell you our purpose with this, because this can be interesting for other parts of the world. Our purpose was twofold. First, to update the social standards in face of the new challenges, particularly the implications of the digital revolution. Second objective, to make sure that we don't have a race to the bottom, we rather have an upward social and economic convergence. These are our two objectives. In a sense, we can adapt this to the world level. First of all, updating the social standards. Our approach is very practical. Let's focus on each target group of the population. Children, young people, men and women, elderly people, people in risk of exclusion. So for each of these groups, we have concrete measures. For children, we have a flagship program called Child Guarantee. Child Guarantee is a powerful claim saying all children should count on a basic guarantee of access to health, education, childcare. Then for the young people, we have the Youth Guarantee, which is already there, but we need to improve. For women and men, we want to make sure that they have real conditions to reconcile family life with working life. And we are introducing law to make sure that women and men, they are not penalized if they meet their family responsibilities. But I would focus particularly on working conditions and saying the following. Of course, we are dealing with new trends in the labor market, old and new trends. The old is a strong move to precarious work of different shapes, okay? But on the top of this, we now have a new phase of the digital revolution. And let me be clear about that. What are the implications of this new phase? They are deep, much deeper than we can now foresee. Because this is not only about spreading internet access to everywhere or changing telecommunications or spreading content industries. No. The current phase of the digital revolution is simply changing completely the way all sectors, all markets work. And we are still at the start of this. More and more people are now working for online platforms in more and more sectors. And we have a new kind of work, let's call it crowd work, where many workers don't have any kind of contract or access to social protection. If we accept things going in this direction, we'll have the most powerful process ever to organize a race to the bottom on working conditions at world level. Let me say this clearly for you. I'm telling to my European colleagues, now we have a big discussion on social dumping in Europe. Look, this is just a small thing, because we are up to something much worrying, which is digital social dumping at large scale, where all sectors, all global chains will be organized by using online platforms, and they will put all workers competing to each other without any kind of conditions. So I'm picturing, a worst scenario, but for us to understand the implications of this. So if you were ever worried with the risk of race to the bottom, now the risk is there and much bigger. Okay? So let me tell you, and I'm concluding, what we in the European Union, we are planning to do to say, stop, no to this. Our aim with this social pillar is the following. We will proclaiming the social pillar with new standards for everybody, for children, for young people, for workers and whatever. But when it comes digital economy, we are coming with a very simple and powerful principle, saying all workers, whatever their kind of jobs, whatever their forms of employment, they need to count on two basic things. One is a clear and transparent contract, labor contract, with decent working conditions, first thing. Second is access to social protection all over their life cycle. We cannot accept that workers don't have these two basic things. And we want this to become law, European law. And let me tell you what happened. We invite social partners in the European Union to negotiate about this new framework to cope with the digital revolution. They are now negotiating this, but let me also tell you that we have the commitment that if they don't reach a negotiated solution, the European Commission and the European Parliament will adopt law. And we announced this from the start. We will adopt law because we want to stop this race to the bottom. Okay? And this law will be tabled in December. This is our deadline. So we are working with a very short deadline. Okay? In the meantime, let me conclude by saying we have the second objective, which is upward convergence. And this is a serious matter because we do have divergences between member states, between regions, in fact, between workers. We have increasing inequalities when it comes meeting these standards. And we want also to stop these divergences, but in order to stop divergences, I'm coming back to my point. Making law or making new agreements between social partners, this is not enough. We do need to change economic policy and fiscal policy. That's why in my report on the social pillar, we are also very clear on what should be changed in economic policy. Example, giving much more priority to investment and jobs creation, giving much more importance to investing in people through education and training. And these should have consequences to our budgetary policies. Otherwise, this is blah, blah. So we need to make sure that our national budgets, they have the fiscal space to invest in people, And when it comes European Union, as we have a common discipline in the framework of Eurozone, we need to have something new, which are now right now discussing, is to create something new called Eurozone budget. But in a sense, you can transpose this to the international level. Particularly when we speak about climate change and supporting transition, of course, you do need an international fund to support member states and all countries making these efforts. And this means to have also a joint initiative on fiscal policies. So I'm concluding like that. I was a bit blunt, but you know, this is now my advantage of being member of the European Parliament. I can say whatever I want, and I hope I was useful.
Thank you very much. I mean, bluntness is the spirit of this meeting. Let's say things that we usually don't say. And I think it is very important, and I thank you very, very much for having been blunt and straight to the point, and also pointing to many of the issues that are on our agenda. And I would now like to turn to Sharon, because many of these issues are on her agenda. And I think probably one of the main challenges all of us have in front of us, but especially you, where you are sitting, is how do we also build alliances? How do we build cooperations? I mean, how can we work more closely together in order to make things change, to make things move? Because as Maria-João was saying, not enough to say, oh, we have the intention to, and then not deliver. So we have a problem in terms of delivery and accountability. So Sharon, from your point of view, how do we move there?
Well, in good trade union debating style, I'd just say I second that. You know, all in favour?
Yeah.
Yes, because frankly, we want that law, Marie-Joëlle. That's what we want at the global level. So you could write the Commission report now, I see Manuela nodding and others, because if that was the outcome, then we'll be celebrating Luke and Kathleen, I think. So you're right, though. The future of work starts now and it's in our hands, and that's Marie-Lena's challenge. Who has to make that happen? Well, I would say to you that labour market disruptions are not new. Everyone talks about all this new challenges of the future of work. Well, we've always had labour market disruptions. What's new is the convergence. Climate change, digitalisation, demographic shifts, refugees, migration, these all make the challenge even greater. But when they're combined with historic levels of inequality and a breakdown of trust in globalisation, as Marie-Joëlle actually described, and it's fuelled by an economic model, I would add, that's based on corporate greed, whereby excessive profits have been driven for the very wealthy global corporations, Matunzi, not so much MNEs, but driven from the basis of labour arbitrage, driven on the basis of labour arbitrage, then we need significant reform. And when those same corporations have driven attacks on collective bargaining to drive down wages, they've used their influence on government to constrain minimum wages, then wages are part of the problem in terms of stagnation. But poverty wages are actually undermining people's trust in all our institutions, including, indeed, democracies. So the first priority for the European Trade Union Confederation and the International Trade Union Confederation is a global wage rise. If we don't give people back some dignity and hope, then we're not going to be able to tackle some of these other questions. And the scale of the problem can't be ignored. We're not talking about a few people. We're talking about 84% of the world's people who say that the minimum wage is not enough to live on. We're talking about 85% of the world's people who say they want the rules of the global economy rewritten. So they're not withdrawing internationalism, but they will if we don't actually give them confidence that the world can work for them. And of course, the global workforce that you described, Marie, is absolutely in trouble. Only 60% are in formal work. The majority of them are in precarious and often unsafe work, and 40% and growing are in informal work. And in fact, too many of our economies on whom those major corporations are dependent have informal workforces of enormous numbers, 70, 80, 90%. In fact, India, one of the wealthiest G20 countries, has 93% of its workforce in the informal economy. And so why is it a surprise that we're seeing informal work appear in our supply chains? Because we failed to govern globalisation. Your words, but they're exactly right. And indeed, when you add to that we've had 89 million of our brothers and sisters in some form of experience of modern slavery in the last 5 years, and they're appearing in our supply chains, and that governance has really broken down. And that's not the way we're going to rebuild trust in our democracies or in our economies. So that's the backdrop of the discussion. And if we don't deal with that and the current environment, then we're missing the point, because people, we've done the polling, people are not worried about technology. They even acknowledge that it may assist to make work and life easier. I think we'll have debates, ethical debates as a society about technology, but for unions we've been integrating technology. In fact, we've used it very well to upskill and increase wages through collective bargaining through history. That's not the point at which we are now, because much of that's actually broken down, and the speed is dramatic. There's no question about that. What people are worried about, extremely anxious about, and don't trust anybody, and therefore you're seeing the rise of populism, is about jobs for themselves and their families, is to secure jobs that they can actually depend on to make a future. And so the question I pose to leaders is, have we given up on full employment? Because it doesn't matter, frankly, it matters for us in terms of just transition, but it doesn't matter if you've got fewer jobs in electric vehicle car manufacturing plants, as long as we've got more jobs in other places. And that's the real challenge, because if we've given up on full employment, tell people that's the case. If not, let's invest in jobs. We know that infrastructure and the care economy are the two biggest medium-term multiplier of jobs that we could invest in. And that's about people. It's enabling green infrastructure, particularly to deal with climate. That's jobs, they're upfront jobs, but they spin off jobs and services in other sectors. And care is the biggest driver at all. In fact, we would argue that caring is what makes us human, and yet we're no longer, it seems, prepared to fund it. Whether it's through social protection, which should be universal, absolutely, or whether it's in fact the essential services around childcare, aged care, health and education that free women to participate in the economy more broadly, as well as create jobs in the care environment, and of course deliver about 4% additional jobs for men through infrastructure and services. So jobs has to be the centrepiece. And then of course digitalisation is increasing, but we have a very simple story about this. It's the tram tracks of the future economy. That's what it is. It's just the tram tracks of the economy. It's not some magic. The technology's a bit magical. I don't know how we make all the connections work, but I mean the actual impact of it is not magic. It's just the way we do business, whether it's family business or community business or entertainment business or the business of the economy. But work, whether it's dependent on digital platforms or not, is still work. Work is work. And businesses must have a social licence to operate. They must pay tax where they earn it, they must contribute to social protection, and they must take employment responsibility, even consumer responsibility, for those that they employ on or depend on to actually sell their wares. And I would argue, and I'm really keen to hear Matunzi's view about this, because the disruption for business, particularly domiciled domestic business, is as great or greater than it is for workers. Wait till these corporations start eating up businesses and tossing them out, which we can already see happening, and then figure what it's like not to have regulation of business and a social licence to operate, to construct formal businesses and formal work. So we think the cost, frankly, of cybercrime for small business is going to be beyond anything you've imagined. And I don't know how you cope with that without state regulation and the kind of infrastructure that makes encryption, cyber protection, cyber police, whatever it is, the rule of law possible. And businesses and governments, frankly, aren't at the starting blocks. And I'm so heartened to hear Maria João this morning that's at least driving an agenda through the European Parliament. But we would say that if governments don't accept responsibility for the registration and regulation of business activity, then for both businesses and workers, the law of the jungle will simply prevail and it will break down our democracies even faster. So we do want to see due diligence mandated for large corporations to ensure both labour rights and compliance with broader areas of business regulation and the rule of law. I delight in telling the Ubers of the world and others that they're informal businesses. They're not registered anywhere. They don't pay tax, they don't take responsibility for all those things we outlined, and unless it's cleaned up, people will fight. And those businesses will in fact simply be, they call themselves marketplaces. Can you imagine? I was talking to a care.com employer the other day. She's actually quite a decent woman. She's got some heart. She comes from US where labour regulation's not known to be robust. And indeed, she says, I'm not an employer, Sharon. We're a marketplace. I go, but hang on, you make money off people whose work is actually, you know, you're actually overseeing, and you're not taking any responsibility. Well, we're taking responsibility. We're trying to provide benefits so people can have vouchers at Walmart and so on. I just kind of like, really? Okay, so we have work to do. We really have work to do. We need, and by the way, unions. I heard the deputy vice president, can't remember, of the World Bank, Keith Hansen anyway, the other day. Deborah was there, actually say, and unions, of course, won't exist in this world. I'm going to have to look for other stakeholders. And so I thought, gee, I was a bit jet-lagged till now, but now I'm awake. I want to tell you that actually we have plans. We want to know that the fundamental rights remain central, with freedom of association being the key to organise across both traditional and new business ventures. A minimum living wage or an equivalent of a contract floor price is in fact in our realm of capacity. Collective bargaining and safe work underpinned by social protection are as relevant today as they will be tomorrow. But we do need some amendments to things like competition policy. We want to know that freelance unions can establish a floor price, and we're seeing that actually with the journalists in Ireland. They've broken through and they're starting to rebuild the base. We know that this is not new union practice. Equity unions, and you have people like Karen Nasbam in the room, I mean, they've ensured actors and other entertainers have been guaranteed a contract price for decades. And so collective organising is collective organising. You just need the tools and the regulatory environment to make it possible. We definitely need the regulatory framework to sustain digital cooperatives. Our two commissioners, one comes from the kind of global services realm, Phil Jennings, and the other one, Rima Navanti, comes from SIWA, where they build cooperatives in the real world, and we're thinking through with them how you actually use digitalisation to build their supply chains for their cooperatives and to make sure they have market access. They're not alone. That's happening in many unions and many countries around the world. So we want cooperative futures, whether it's direct employment, agency work, cooperatives, freelance work. We want to know that these actually can in fact be assured the right to organise and bargain collectively, to set the minimum wage or floor price, and to be underpinned by social protection. There are many other areas of innovation emerging in our unions. We organise owner-drivers, we organise street vendors, we organise care workers through technology, engineers who are independent, and of course there are unions such as Union Sweden are now positioning themselves as start-up hubs. So Keith Hansen can try to write us off and others, but I can tell you we don't plan to go anywhere. We will see a lot more innovation, And indeed, as unions work out organising structures, we want a lot of the necessary regulation to be picked up in the ILO's Future of Work Commission, so we have high hopes for this. We've also built a global reference group to support our commissioners, and we want to work with ACTRAV and others to make sure that those voices are coming from all areas of our economy. But indeed, Deborah mentioned just transition. We don't think you can write off climate over here, technology over here. These labour market disruptors are intersectoral. They have to be. And so we'll fight for just transition measures that guarantee both protection and economic inclusiveness, whether it's being driven by transformation in energy or in industrial transformation with technology shifts in production, or reshoring in terms of 3D printing and so on, or robotry, whatever it is. You know, technology has not yet been invented. We will demand that just transition measures include secure pensions for older workers, retraining and redeployment support for younger workers, the inclusion of young people through quality apprenticeships and other affirmative measures, decent work and just wages in new areas of work, and we need again to consider working time. Convention number 1. We actually need to gain, Kathleen, this is your mantra, to consider working time. Frightens a few people, but let's face it, it's not fit for purpose. And due diligence by corporations must be, in fact, the risk analysis that goes with responsible business to ensure that they mitigate. They're not going to be perfect, that they mitigate against violations of human and labour rights and environmental standards, abuse of environmental standards, with the grievance and our support for the remedy that makes it possible. And Maria Schual is right. We need the Just Transition funds that make it possible for critical investment in these areas and in jobs growth. Equal treatment and the right to work must also apply for migrants and refugees. We're facing the biggest displacement in our history, and yet, you know, people are arguing over a few thousand resettlement here or a few thousand there, as if it's the end of the universe. And of course, beyond that, you have government leaders fighting over the migration compact, which I thought we'd settled, Anna, back in the early part of the last decade, where we actually had global governance guidelines. We had commissions and all sorts of things, and poor Louise Arbour is trying to deal with this again. I will just give you a piece of good news. The G20 nations do recognise, the Labor ministers at least, most of them, recognise the failures of economic activity today and the challenges of tomorrow, and they took an historic decision in Germany in May, I think. Didn't get a lot of press, but it lays the foundations for the future. It says that violations of decent work and fundamental principles and rights at work cannot be part of the competition. If we want to build a competition floor that people trust, that businesses can depend on, then you have to take the abuse out of the equation. That's why we need that rule of law at the global level as well as in Europe. And of course the G7 ministers just a few weekends ago, led by Minister Poletti in Italy, have established a platform to work together and with social partners on the emerging issues for freedom of work. And it was a really good discussion. Even the US Secretary of State agreed with us, although not on the rights question, I must say. He told me he agreed with everything I said, and then he relisted what he thought it was, and there was sort of a small gap, Karen, I have to say. So, you know access to lifelong learning is critical. You know there are significant skills gap. You know active labour markets and market policies are no longer, and regulations no longer fit for work. But there are just two other very quick issues. One is data protection and the other is digital rights. Because, you know, we'll see companies divided in two. I stole this term, but we'll see companies who are data predators. They're already there. They're the Googles and Amazons and others in the world who are appropriating your data for their own purposes. And then we'll see data protectors. So we'll see data predators and data protectors, and we need the regulation against the predators to protect the other companies equally. So you don't have to tell you, I think it was Angela Merkel who called out the algorithm and said, you know, basically, not her words, but we need to regulate the algorithm. Other people are talking about taxing it. Whatever, it doesn't matter. it means that we have to actually have the regulation that's fit for purpose because, and it might need changes in intellectual property rights because people have a right to their own data, and it's that simple. So companies will in fact face many of these challenges, and I worry about small to medium enterprises because, frankly, we're on the same team. If they're being screwed by the big corporations, their disruption is as great as indeed the workers, and they're employing the bulk of the workers and certainly the bulk of the growth, then we're in trouble. So we need that responsibility right through the supply chains. And indeed the ITUC is developing some of these themes. I think, Tim, I forgot to hold it up, but there's a paper that Tim will circulate tomorrow which is really just the basis of the start of the debate. Anyone who says they've got all the answers to this, we hope the European Commission will have, Marie-Joëlle, because that'll make our job much easier. And I talk to Luca about this all the time. But certainly it's a start of a year-long debate for us. There is the Commission here at the ILO, but there's also our own Congress at the end of next year. So, Marilena, thank you for what I think is one of the most important discussions. But I beg the colleagues to do two things. One, demand that dialogue's at the heart of this because, again, Marie-Joëlle was right. If the social partners aren't driving the future, then who the hell is? That's the question. Because we're leaving it then to the predators, in my view, because politicians should be actually protecting what it is that the social partners want in an economic sense and with civil society what people want in a social sense. So let's see what we can do to get it right. But it's certainly a critical debate, and it isn't just around the technology. It's around what builds security and trust for people in terms of the future of work. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Sharon. Now I'm turning to Mr. Lustenau. How do you see all these things from a national perspective and from a national government's perspective? That's the $1 million question.
Bueno, no es fácil, ¿no?
It's not easy. I think the question is the most difficult of all. In any case, we know that we had an original plan to respond to this. The three initial questions, did give us a new vision, new corrections. And as I've been listening to the previous brothers and sisters, I was asking myself other questions, of course. I had an old professor in the university who said that all these activities, the main character that they have is that they're optional. They enable us to develop, explore ideas and potential ideas. And I think that this has occurred to me prematurely in this case. Therefore, I'm going to change somewhat the initial presentation I was going to make, and I'm going to respond to it rather differently to the initial proposal. And I'm going to focus on four topics. The first topic has to do with a very national topic, very Uruguayan for my country. What policies have we developed for some time now? And the second topic, the second expression of all this is what results have we obtained with those policies? Third issue is the central topic at hand, which is directly linked to these policies. What is going to be the work, future work? What do we have to look at? What do we want for future work? What can we, from the political angle, do for work in the future? And if it can be done, is it just policy, that is work of the future? Or what is the repercussion of this policy on future work? And something we can't leave behind either, and we can leave it behind every day less, the international dimension of policy. Each and every day, we're not just living in a closed community. We're not living in something very small, but our activities here, we don't even know where they're going to end up having an impact and in what way, what shape. So let's begin with a simple review. Some people here are very familiar with international policy. They know the political sign of my country. But I need to tell you For some of you who might not be familiar with this, my country's had a leftist government since 2005. It's a sort of moderate left. It's a rather tranquil, peaceful left, one is not revolutionary in the greatest of styles. It's a different kind of revolution, to just put it in some way. But they've already occupied 3 governments, and we could have delved into this for more than 12 years. We have organized a whole set of changes when we delved into this, specifically in this field, this labor field, this central field, important field for the country. Why? Because the tension of labor rights in my country before the year 2005 was in another place. Who governed up until that point of time, my country, weren't looking at workers' rights. They were looking at employers' rights. And whatever this concern, however much it might hurt, there was no awareness of what was happening with the popular classes. And here, amongst the participants, there might be an ECLAC representative, you know that this data was reflected in statistics. Uruguay had some data which were alarming for a country which historically was characterized specifically by social rights. Now, the first law of the 8 hours in South America was sanctioned in my country. The first legislation regarding Social Security in Latin America was sanctioned in my country. And I could focus on a whole set of historical standards, national standards in my country. But of course, the governments, and neoliberal governments, particularly of the 90s, took care of disarming all this. And they saw to it that the economic policy was more important than the social policies, and that basic human rights, fundamental human rights of each and every one of us was just put in second place. So to the extent that, as you know, in South America was really chastised, punished by severe crises in the years of the 90s, and unfortunately today, none of the Latin Americans, and specifically Ibero-Americans, are not at all proud of this. And it's still a very rich territory, grounds, but wealth is very badly distributed. And then there were very powerful people, extremely powerful people in economic fields, but also extremely poor as far as actual poverty went. So in terms of poverty, terrible poverty, slaves in some cases. Right. Our government came to power in 2005 with a whole battery of reforms, and they touched upon different fields. One of them fields was a reform of the world of work. Another field was re-updating, embellishing, improving national labor standards, which went from special statutes, reforming work, rural work statutes, and then it became statutes of the reforming domestic workers, establishing standards on the third sector services and subsidiary responsibilities, and for companies to use all this, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, also reforming aspects of collective labor rights, with legislation for collective bargaining, as private sector, the public sector, protection and promotion of freedom of association. All this was inaugurated. Now, in Uruguay, and that is contrary to the reactionary voices which were being listened to, and everyone listens to oneself, this did not really produce an economic crisis. Our country, Uruguay, has had 12 years of growth, sustained growth, so no economic crisis. Even faced with the greatest adversities, Latin America, even faced with the greatest adversities of South America, Uruguay continues growing. Of course, you can tell me or say to me, perhaps it started off from a very small basis. It might be, but it's true that everything kept growing and kept growing and growing. So it wasn't just growing, but in real terms, it was being redistributed. Everything was being redistributed, continuously being redistributed, and taking people out of poverty, out of extreme poverty, out of medium poverty, and trying to see to it that the medium sectors of population would have access to best living conditions. And what is this? Well, this is strictly political decisions. Political decisions accompanied by or sustained by, because the basis, the population in its majority, profoundly democratic of a society, profoundly democratic, supported that whole change. It was supported by them. And now, careful, if you look at another hand, what was happening with the employers? Well, they were more and more prosperous, and their enterprises flourished, moreover. And the payment increased potentially. The quantity of active workers increased exponentially. And all this with a distribution of rights, gentlemen and ladies. So this was the only policy, the labor policy. No, that wasn't all by itself. We also reformed the tributary fiscal policy. Of course we reformed the fiscal policies. If we didn't redistribute it better, then it's impossible to do this. We also improved health policy. We created a national health system. And some other things were done with a future impact. Oh, this had an impact on the future, of course. But listen to the following. There are two things here. First, educational reform, which on its basis has what we call a 6-year plan. It meant that each child had access to public primary education. To remember, in Uruguay, education is compulsory, universal. Each child that had access to primary education was given a PC. And then afterwards, this was extended to the remainder of the children. The secondary education, they all have their machine to be able to be connected with this modern world. And this is not just a little signal. I'm going to explain why. The second issue, how this was done? Just by a governmental decision? No, it was done with an effort, a tripartite effort with social dialogue. This was done convening the workers' organizations and the employers' organizations. That's how we did it, in such a way that we did not receive a great severe criticism from the employers. Famous case in 1999, they said that we had a convention 98 that we endorsed it because we wanted to just discuss. No, what we became a solidarity or express solidarity to is labor's rights, the right to redistribute. That is the nucleus of the matter. It's not an obligation, a direct obligation, or indirectly we have to promote other people's conditions. And of course, this, of course, made them our enemy, but at the same time, it did generate a greater well-being in their population, a better distribution. And I insist, the enterprises, it just didn't go badly for them at all. The country continues to grow and has been growing for 12 years in an uninterrupted way. And you also have to see that this was the exercise of many tripartite, social dialogue, fortified, strengthened democracy, a highly participatory democracy, with strong trade unions, with an exponential growth of the unions, and also with a growth of the employers' organizations. Why not say it? But this strengthens democracy. The force of the intermediate forces strengthens, consolidates democracy, or at least we believe in those principles. What is true is that throughout the time, as I said, this generated as an example, amongst other things, being the country that has the greatest formalization in Latin America, the country which has the greatest degree of formalization. And also, a second important thing for ECLAC, as far as social policies are concerned, basically, we occupy the first place in the important rankings of ECLAC, education, distribution, et cetera, et cetera. And all this is a spin-off of this policy, so the political will and associated to political will. And that's why social dialogue is so essential. We cannot do without it. This model is not out of fashion or out of date. Now let's talk about the future of work. Here, I'm just going to give you some details. This Ceval plan led to other strategic investments carried out by the Uruguayan state. We have a new connective cable in Montevideo with Boca Raton in the United States. You know, those internet cables, they're underwater ones. And then having a module. We don't really wonder where the cloud is. Where is the cloud? Many of these equipment for the cloud is in my country, 30 kilometers from the Montevidean area. So this is a tremendous progress. This has made Uruguay be the first software producer in Latin America. So now we are producing software from having first tried to acquire it. So it's a very strange world. Suddenly we wake up between 12,000 cows, and now we're producing cloud products. No, we still have some cows. So you should see that this is a transformation, and it's educational transformation, and therefore it has to be set up, installed. Our 6-year plan here, which we have announced, they gave this as a result to have generations of children already practically from kindergarten are involved in this digital world that we're witnessing. And that the enterprises adapt to this, not just producing software, but producing the most important thing, what they are doing through the digital phenomenon. Uruguay, of course, it continues being as the first production is agricultural and animal husbandry. And that sector is the one that has most included robotics. And even more, a recent study indicates that within 10 years, 48.3% of Uruguayan jobs will be involved or at stake because of robotics and informatics, computer sciences. What should we do? Should we just sit down and cry? Or should we think that we should accompany this change? In some way, the world continues to having this production, and my country already has it. Let's remember Chaplin's. Somebody hit him in modern times. He was being hit. Of course, he continues feeling it, experiencing it. But the issue is how to see to it that that change should not infringe our rights, hurt us. Think about the lady faced with the first industrial revolution, who looked at her situation and looked at the steam engine. And she said to herself, how am I going to compete with this? How am I going to adapt my life to this if I have another situation? The world has been transformed. It will continue transforming. And we shouldn't just think about a world full of robotics, with a humanoid features. We are surrounded by robots. Even the telephones we have, the iPhones, our phones they're part of robotics. They're a part of the future that is working, a future and which is present. So what to do with this? 2 issues. Last ones, and then I promise to close. So the last refers to national legislations. We must work continuously on these phenomenon, not to make our economies precarious. Making us live in a precarious situation is a bad thing. We've already gone through flexibilization. It's just a story. Now someone's going to say to me, oh, my country, I listened to an employer's speech that says, no, young people prefer working as entrepreneurs. They don't want the state enterprise. Well, I don't think that's true, They don't want to work a state enterprise which pays them a very poor salary. They don't want to work in these state enterprises that contains some formality, but an enterprise that pays them well, recognizes the talent, recognizes many things for them. Of course, they're going to want to be in that secure situation. And so what is happening is capital, and that security imposes other problems on us, faced with payment of taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And let's just speak truly. This is a problem. And I don't believe in informality as a way out of this. On the contrary, a greater training, greater education, greater formality. Those are three answers. Problems, well, which are not national. Now, but we are talking about national policies. We can say this is a closed world. You can tell us this. But I'd like to remind you that we're working, exporting to about 77 markets, maybe even each and every one of your countries. What is true here of all of this is that the world is exerting pressure in another way. And when a country, a small country such as mine, is complaining, it's complaining because of some reforms, innovative reforms. I don't want to give any names here, but from a very big neighbor. There, we have the consequence here that this neighbor automatically calls our country, complains before Mercosur, the regional bloc that we belong to, and of course then there is a free circulation of goods and services. The country complains, and the answer is the foreign ministry of the big country is calling our ambassador to tell him to render accounts. And why are we complaining? Why don't they like our liberating reforms? Why do they think different from us? Well, the second answer, as our external service were affirming this, the second answer came forthwith. And therefore, I'd like to warn you what we have to fight with here and fight for. 10 days ago, that country, that big country, in South America, as you know, I told you there were 3 million people from Uruguay and 12 million of cows. So there's 4 cows per Uruguayan citizen. So one of them gets up and leaves and says, moo. Right. Well, here in this story, we're producing a lot of milk, very important dairy products, and we're exporting to a tremendous amount of markets. And one of our main markets is to export to that very, very big country. So the answer was to say, ministers of that country said, well, we're not going to buy anything more from you. We're not going to buy from this country. We're not going to buy more from Uruguay because Uruguay is strangling the milk. Where are we going to buy the milk from? So all you have to do is just grab the public accounts and see there isn't one drop of milk from Uruguay is coming into our country because we're full of cow milk. So how difficult is all of this in reality? Reality doesn't have much to do with the whole milk sector of my country. And it promises the people who produce milk producers are not multinationals, they're family workers. They're within their lands. They get up at 3 a.m. to take care of their cows, and this requires a tremendous effort. Our country loves them, so you can imagine it's a very huge blow just to say you are not right. That world of work, that is the one we do not want. That world of work is the one that internationally we wish to ban, forbid. That world of work, these activities in the world of work are the ones that organizations such as the WTO should condemn. That is the world of work that we do not aspire to. We do aspire to a world of work where there are going to be many transformations, where all our workers and I'm looking at the work as a big village, a global village. Each and every day we're more entitled to become more technical, get more developed. But at these points in times, the issue of time, working hours, working time, and that is one of the big challenges. The right to working time. The first industrial revolution began with that, so be careful, gentlemen. This is not an old topic. The right to deconnect. Today, we're all connected from the time when we get up to the time we go to bed with work issues. So we should do, is this really fair? Is there really a freedom, a private life involved here? These are the challenges we have facing us in the future. And this is the world of work which in some way, technological aspects, cannot make us slaves. And we don't want that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we could go on with this discussion for a very long time, but we've got another panel, and Anna is already looking at me, telling me that I need to stop. But in any case, I think it's very important what has been said in this panel by our three speakers. And we have looked at very important issues that are linked with how do we make sure that we stabilize the rights that are needed, and how do we make sure that no one is left behind. And the examples that were given by Sharon, by Mr. Lustenau, and by Marie-João illustrate that. And what can we do, and what's the role of a powerful international trade union organization, and how can that also be translated into the national trade union action, but also what is the role of a big, I would say the richest, geographical economic integrated space in the world, which is Europe, in terms of also, again, because we've always looked at Europe, setting the pace and setting the scene. And how can other important regional integration processes that were a big hope a few years ago has being able to follow in the steps of not just a free trade area, but an integrated economic and social area, also help the development of a very important region of the world. How do we go back to politics? Because that's all linked with politics. And how do we put politics back at the heart of all these processes? And I'm sure that in the course of our discussions, the whole debate on the links between the national, the regional, the interregional, and the international levels will come back again, because I think everyone in this room agrees that there is not one single national solution that can help us overcome the challenges that we have. The economies are so integrated, the societies are so integrated, that there is no capacity to do anything which is purely based on the national level. And that's also where the role of the ILO becomes so important. So I think we've set a great scene for what's going to come afterwards. I just need to thank you, the three of you, Mr. Lustenau, Maria-João, Sharon, for three great interventions, and also for giving us a lot of food for thought for the follow-up. And I would like to invite Anna and the members of the Dialogue One to step in, or do we have to go for a family picture? We have to go for a family, so we run outside and we run back inside. Okay? Thank you very, very much.
Fantastic.
Oh, John, I know that you are speaking with the local time, and today I need to speak with you.
So, Anna, can you guide the people in?
Some governments are raising problems.
Exactly. And you have some governments in there that aren't helpful, but
So we go out for the picture? Mamadou? People outside. Where do
Is he a panelist or a trade union representative?
He's an employer representative. He's a friend.
Okay. No, I'm only asking because I'm listed here as a panelist.
Yes. Don't worry.
About the seating arrangement.
Yeah, no, the seating is like this.
All right. No, it's also the labeling I put on there.
He needs to be with the lady.
Okay.
You can keep yours and reuse it.
Don't worry.
Okay, no.
Whatever we decide, we decide.
Okay, no, it's also because on the live streaming, I'm labeling as a panelist.
Anna, je peux remettre celui de Madame Barreau. Ça va? Elle était là en
So I will be more strict with the time because we start later.
Strict, but that means we reduce our time.
No, I don't think I reduced because I had already given you 5 minutes. You know, the people have taken more. Doesn't mean that you know I reduced. I stick to what it was decided.
Yeah. Brian, you one?
No, but before you say the center for
Nice meeting you. I'm just bringing coffee for Lais, but I'm getting her coffee because she must be jet.
From West, yes. Labor law? Labor law, law and development.
is Mamadou here? I need to start because I'm a bit late. So can you please tell Mamadou? Excuse me. What's the name of the? Are we on? Can we start? Because even if not many people, I can do my introduction. Nobody can. Okay. Dear colleagues, welcome back. I know that this is hectic and I think people need to rearrange, but I would suggest that we start this actual first dialogue after the panel on the role of politics, and I think that actually, you know, we have already seen that, you know, probably one debate will follow into the others because, you know, we are retaking some of the elements that are already been set up in the scene at the beginning. I'm Anna Biondi, I'm the Deputy Director of the Bureau for Workers' Activities. I'm here together with both academics and employer representative and trade union members to continue this discussion. And if you don't mind, I would like to restart this first dialogue, retaking those two dimensions that Deborah Greenfield already was mentioning in her opening about how do we find, which comes from the Constitution, from the Declaration of Philadelphia, if we want still present a concerted action of governments, employers and workers for democratic decision to promote the common welfare, but also the well-being and spiritual development of the worker per se. All these dimensions in the past 100 years, for the first 100 years, have been associated with work. And we know that in ancient Greece, for example, work actually was slavery, you know, and certainly the emergence of the workers' organization, of trade unions demanding the rights associated to works. We have already discussed the 8 hours, the Convention number 1 of the ILO on the 8 hours of work, and demanding also full productive and freely chosen employment, as in Convention 122, together with the creation of the welfare state based on solidarity, has been the foundation, sometimes the aspiration that has become foundation of the democratic order based on an inclusive political and socio-economic decision for the common good. So if we have seen that in the 80s, the replacement of solidarity with competition as the axiom that is more important, and leading also to the financialization of profit instead of the growth of the real economy, and also a progressive individualization of protection. Some consider also that democracy has been considered a casualty of globalization, and you have seen that we have already discussed the reaction that unfortunately has brought again nationalism in the forefront, but also xenophobia and possibly fascism to court. So, you know, all these fears about what has already been discussed about the technological changes, but also the decision, who decides about the industrial policies, you know, there is a sense that there is an oligopolies that have access to market decisions with the political powers that have abdicated decision on production, on consumption and redistribution. And this is why this dialogue continues basically what we discussed before. Is it possible to bounce back those moral basic values that were at the base of a renewed social contract? This time, not only anthropomorphic, as it was already said in the first discussion, but taking into the equation also the nature, climate change, you know, the environment for all. And so, you know, it's like what we will be discussing and asking, and what I want to ask already to the colleagues that are on this side of the table, who will have this discussion for the panel number 1, is, you know, it's like, are we able to give answers to those that are not in the world of work, not because of their choice, or who, as many women do, see their work not considered as such, or lucky, or in a work that is lacking benefit and rights? Can the governments regain the role of regulator, which is a complementary to the, and not a substitution of the welfare state? And are trade unions, who have been indeed the founders of those of that social democracy, not a party, but social as an adjective and democracy, able to rethink themselves to reach the workers that are including outside those in the informal employment relationship? And are employers still interested in regulation as the level playing field? In particular, regulation, it was already touched upon for the intermediaries between MNEs and SMEs, and we know that SMEs also have, you know, encounter the problem and become the weaker link. Is it necessary a further social outreach besides the classic partners of the ILO? And are we able indeed to put the worker as a person in the driving seat of his or her choices? Allow me to quote in the end of these few points that I prepared for the beginning, something that Bruno Trentin used to write, you know, freedom comes first. Of course, he was talking about freedom of association, but also the freedom of the workers to access, of the person to access the tool for personal fulfillment and growth, you know, for the freedom to know and also to participate in the choices for, you know, employment that goes beyond the world of work, but indeed they become so important important for societies. I have an excellent panel of colleagues that are ready to take these floors, and I would like to start. You have the list. I go directly into the discussion. I will give them this time less time. You know, we will try to really stick to the 5 minutes in order to have at least 2 rounds of intervention in this from the panelists this time. I start with Lais Abramo, Chief of the Social Development Division of CEPAL, former ILO colleagues, and thank you so much, Lais, for being here.
ILO in the heart.
Always ILO in the heart. Very good. That's why you are here. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ana. Voy a hablar en español.
I'm going to speak Spanish, following my Uruguayan colleague who's just spoken, and trying, within 5 minutes, to give you an indication on some things in such an important discussion. I would like to thank ACTRA for its invitation. It's a tremendous pleasure for me to be here in this house, which is still my home, despite the fact that I'm within ECLAC in Latin America. I am going to take a point which appeared quite often in the previous point, and which is in the questions asked here for this dialogue, which is the issue of inequality. Equality, relations between equality and decent work, future of work, and workplace, and the place of work, right, and society. For ECLAC, equality is north, and the horizon, the strategic horizon of development and work is the master of equality. To say that work is the master of equality can already open some doors, and it can also close some doors. So speaking from the vision of Latin America, historically, the Latin American market has been the essential link which links up highly heterogeneous productive production, in which low productive sectors only generate 90% of income, and with a great inequality in the different homes. And this is very different from productivity gains and a very stratified access to quality jobs, decent work, social production. Historically, Latin America has produced inequalities. However, in the recent period, between 2012 and 14, the labor market has been a key factor to reduce poverty and reduce inequality. And here, I'm just echo the words of the Vice Minister of Labor, Uruguay, who he said, we've had a period of a relative positive period of growth for labor, and on the basis of policies which are implemented by different countries of Latin America at that point in time, which had to deal with policies of a redistributive nature and extension of rights, both socially as well as the labor market. So in that period is a period where poverty was reduced significantly from about 48% of the population to about 29% of the population, and also inequality in income. Both the Gini coefficient, inequality of home and within homes, it is something, it's a topic which is taking up our time today. It's a functionality of income. What is the part of the pie which goes to capital, which part goes to labor? You know that there has been a reduction on the part of the pie allocated to work. But in Latin America in 2006, 2014, the share increased and improved. And this also had to do with policy, to do with the consolidation of collective bargaining, the increase of minimum wages, the formalization of work. All that was important. And this is something which is very important to think about when we're thinking about the future of work instead of the politics and policies. Without, yes, precariousness is inevitable. It's a necessary status to do with globalization, technology. In Latin America, this is what occurred in that period that I'm locating in 2012, 2014. But despite this, there was still progress As you know, there's a progress. There are deficits too. True. Decent work in Latin America. There's 16 million people in South America who live in poverty and in dire poverty. And these positive trends are experiencing a moment of inflection, lack of flexibility. There's still this high magnitude of poverty and inequality in Latin America. It is the continent with the greatest amount of inequalities in the world. Is not the poorest, and more than half the people were in a vulnerable situation or poor situation. And when you go past the poverty line, but they could fall back again into poverty if we were to change the labor market conditions, increasing unemployment, informality, if there were cuts in social policies which are at the basis of this process of transformation, or if we increased unemployment. And unfortunately, this is what is beginning to happen in Latin America. There's a more difficult, complicated political and economic scenario where all this progress is threatened. Almost 20% of the workers, women and men who are working, are poor, and a high percentage of labor income is below minimum national wages. So approximately 43% of the women and 30% of the men, 60% of young people, men and women, earn income which is below minimum wages. And some have increased more, others less. The level is very low generally. So to follow the redistribution of poverty and the reduction of poverty and more equality depends on the labor market. Another thing I'd still like to say, if we still have time, what do we understand by equality? I think it's a very important issue, both to look at the current situation as well as the future, for who should be in that, as Anna just said, is not just the organized workers, it's everyone, all the citizens. For equality, no doubt, is an equality of means, income, access to productive resources, equality in property. But basically, it's equality of rights. When we're talking about equality, we have a broad vision of equality, which doesn't just have to deal with the issue of income, which is key, I'm sure, when we talk about all these topics, but also has to do with more than that, with rights, with capacities, with autonomies. Here, I'd like to pick up an idea which is at the very basis of this formulation, the concept of decent work. All the people who are experiencing this work or need work to live are subject to rights. And we can use that for all citizens, men and women, as the representative from the European Parliament said. From birth, when they're children, right up until the end of one's life. So here, to make headway in a decisive way, in a reduction of inequality, it's very important to deal with the different strata of inequality, not just the fact that we accept this concept, but how does it manifest, express itself? And I'd just like to leave this before you, because I'm coming to the end of my time. My time is almost up for the 5 minutes. In Latin America, no doubt, the issue of gender is a key aspect, a key issue. There's no doubt, no discussion there. Gender equality is present, and the region's agenda, in a vital way. There is an issue of socioeconomic inequality, which is essential too when we discuss the issue of equality and of income. But I just wanted to bring to you another 3 elements, key elements to take into account for this equation is our sexual inequalities, not just amongst countries, but within the countries, and inequalities which are ethnic and racial. We cannot just talk about poverty, inequality, decent work in Latin America without thinking mainly about indigenous people's situation. There are 46 million people, and the Afro-descendant population, 30 million people are involved there. So without integrating that ethno-racial dimension, issue of inequality, and the issue of age, young people, older people. What we're seeing here, there is a matrix for social inequality, which is strongly focused on productive matrix, which is also then densified, and a culture of privilege, which is a constitution of the social historical background of Latin America, and which naturalizes this inequality and this fact that you don't take the other person into account. And this is part of the social inequality matrix, and it's a central element of this. And all this is linking up, chaining up throughout the life course. And there are sectors of the population: indigenous women, Afro-descendant women, young women, Afro-descendant in rural areas. And all they summarize in their lives and experiences all these multiple dimensions of inequality without recognizing this, or not wanting to recognize this reality in the establishment of policies. Then we're not going to be able neither to reduce the deficits in decent work nor make headway towards equality and prosperity in the region. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Lais, because indeed I think that you have already gone much further in spelling out which are the level of inequalities, which are the level of rights, or the right-based approach that we need to discuss, and starting from Latin America, but giving a picture that is valid, I think, universal. And actually, I want to pass the floor to Professor Webster, that, before of the University of Wits in Johannesburg, but now the director of the Southern Center for Inequality Studies in South Africa. And I think that Ed can continue on this reflection. Please.
Thank you, Anna, colleagues, friends. The future of work looks bleak. Either you are drawn into the new world of hyper-competition, working long hours in increasingly demanding conditions, or you join the growing numbers of unemployed who struggle to survive in the urban and rural slums of the world. Is an alternative emerging? A combination of policy innovations from above and new forms of organizing from below amongst precarious workers that could challenge the idea that bad jobs are inevitable. This, I see, is the challenge for the future of work. And my point of departure then, I guess, is similar to that of the previous speaker, the growing inequality in the world of work, the growing polarization. The most striking impact of globalization is the blurring of the boundaries between work and society. Historically, work and society were institutionally separate. You left home to go to work, to go to the factory or to the office. There were two spheres, the public and the private. This distinction, I suggest, is being blurred in three ways. Firstly, today, wage work is performed in a variety of spaces. On the street, in the home, in cyberspace, we heard in the previous section, crowd, online platforms, and above all, in the growing informal workplaces. Secondly, there are new actors in the employment relation, because of the inadequacy of traditional institutional actors, both the state, government, and national unions, failing to defend worker rights. The space has been created for new actors, for example, NGOs, employment agencies or labor brokers, HR consultancy firms, churches, faith-based organizations. In my country, traditional healers, citizen advice bureaus, global unions, employment arbiters, grassroots activists, and social movements. Indeed, the most dramatic strike we had in South Africa that led to what we call the Marikana massacre in August 2014, when over 30 people were killed, was not led by a trade union. It was a basic workers' committee, a grassroots organization. So that is the second change. The third is the absence of adequate social protection through and long-term unemployment leading to what one could call social disintegration. I've been conducting research amongst retrenched gold miners, to the heart of our economy, long-term unemployed mine workers. And from them, for their lives, unemployment comes with a deep sense of loss. They dream that they have lost a limb. The men find their marriages falling apart. I'm no longer a man, they say. Without the safety net of a welfare state, they turn to certain livelihood strategies, such as recycling waste, varieties of casual labor. But, and this is the crucial point for my intervention here, they cannot imagine a life without regular employment. They experience what I want to call a cruel optimism. Cruel optimism because they aspire to decent work. An aspiration that looks increasingly unattainable. Cruel optimism. They maintain the idea that the only kind of work that's worthwhile is decent work, yet it is unattainable. I call that cruel optimism. Let me make a theoretical point. Ultimately, the relationship between the market and society is a contradictory one. On the one hand, the unregulated market destroys, undermines, fractures, fragments society. While on the other hand, it also creates what could be called an active society, where individuals come together in groups and movements, generating cultures of solidarity and resistance. So this allows me, colleagues, to end on an optimistic note. We've begun to see, I think, two kinds of movements, one from above and the other from below, that makes me question whether bad jobs are inevitable. We've begun to see in Africa, in India, unions that are crossing the divide between formal and informal. They are beginning to move out of the comfort zone of traditional work, mobilizing that large swathe of precarious workers. Let me give an example to illustrate. In Uganda, the traditional union faced in the transport sector, faced by declining public sector transport workers due to privatization, started to organize the informal taxi drivers that emerged, what are called the border, those motorized cycles, the informal taxi drivers. And they made a decision to revitalize and cross that divide and move from a membership of 3,000 to 90,000 members. There are a range of other examples I could give, but I want to give that first as an example of organizing from below. But we've also seen innovative policy innovation from above in social policy in the South, what some have called a quiet revolution. The institutionalizing of social protection as a right. In India, we have the Rural Employment Guaranteed Scheme, which entitles every rural household to 100 days' work. In Brazil, we have the Bolsa Familia program. In South Africa, we have the Community Work Program that guarantees 2 days a week public employment. These are examples I'm suggesting to you of reform from above. While these, let me call them counter trends, are being challenged by the emergence of right-wing governments in the North and in the South, the mobilization of these swaths of unprotected labor in the South and the progressive policy initiatives from above point, if nurtured by labor, towards an alternative future for the world of work. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ed, and indeed for continuing this reflection, giving us a green picture at the beginning, but also giving us already ideas on how we can think about the changes. And this brings me to Supriya Ruth, who is indeed with an assistant professor of Victoria in Canada, but comes from India. And I think that you are able also to bridge this previous intervention, including if employment is still indeed the cornerstone of society and what governments and social partners can do.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Maria Elena, for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be here and participate in what in the previous session we have heard, the blunt dialogue. And I do wish to be blunt. Following on Edward's comments, I would think that the blurring of work and society is a good thing, because work needs to be seen in the context of society rather than the market. And I'm really thankful to Guy Ryder that he has framed one of the dialogues as an interaction between work and society rather than work and market. And that's the context in which I'll offer my comments in my given 5 minutes. So here we go. The ILO, while inviting me, has supplied me with a fact sheet on future of work that also discusses, and you all have that, and that discusses standard and non-standard forms of work, which is one of the concerns of the International Labour Organization. Before I make my comment in this respect, I need to tell you that I come from the ivory tower of academia. I'm not fighting on the streets like trade union. I'm not engaged with workers like employers, representative. I am far away, and that gives me a perspective, and I'm happily in the ivory tower. So therefore, I'm going to argue that the ILO's formulation of standard and non-standard form of work is seriously problematic. Maria Elena mentioned today morning that we look forward to Europe in giving us regulations and ideas. And I think that is part of the problem. We should not be looking at Europe. And one thing that I noticed is, while we look forward to learning from Europe, Europeans do not reciprocate. They don't feel like they need to learn from the other parts of the globe. And therefore, as the president of ITUC mentioned, that many of these platforms, such as the internet or the technologies, the fundamental issues have not changed. The form of doing things have changed. So why I say that the ILO's perception of standard and non-standard is seriously flawed? Because that the ILO perceives that there is a standard, which is problematic. By standard, the ILO perceives that the industrial employment is the standard. It might have been a standard in Europe. It never attained a standard in the rest of the globe. And even so, it's far worse even now. It is no way a standard. Why this is a problem? If we perceive something to be a standard, our goals and normative aim is focused only with that standard, which means that all our executive, legislative, and all other bureaucratic policies would aim to attain that standard, which means that everyone would have to adopt the same policies irrespective of the differences in politics, in economics, in culture, in ways of doing work. Irrespective of all these diversities, everyone ought to be aiming to that one standard, and that is flawed. Workers cannot have social justice, workers cannot have their aspirations fulfilled if we pursue a policy of moving from non-standard to standard. What needs to be recognized is work in its context of society, rather than the market, as I mentioned at the outset, which means the International Labour Organization, more than any other body or government, needs to recognize that when we talk about improvement of conditions of workers, we need to recognize the heterogeneity of work and the diversity of situated living of the workers. Only by recognizing this heterogeneity and lived experiences of workers, we would be able to promote interests of workers or promote aspirations of workers as they want it, rather than trying to attain a European standard or imposing an European standard to the rest of the globe. So that's the first issue that I hope to comment on. The second issue is, again, which is related to the first issue. Once we are out of this standard and non-standard framework, that influences our idea of understanding workers' rights. Because if you look at international standards formulated either by the International Labour Organization or by the government, and most of the world's governments have received their labor laws from Europe and industrializing Europe. Therefore, the labor rights, or the idea of labor rights, is construed with its reference to that standard. And those rights that are extremely valuable, extremely important for industrial employment may not always be fulfilling for workers who are working informally, who are working in the so-called non-standard form of work. In order to recognize these outside the so-called standard and workers' aspirations within those work, the idea of labor rights also needs to overcome its limitations of industrial employment form. Workers' entitlements needs to be seen in addition to labor rights, what I have called in articles that I've written a rights plus approach, because labor rights do not always help all workers. However, I do want to emphasize I'm not a right nihilist. So I do consider that there are fundamental human rights and labor rights that are universal, and all workers should have access to that. But my point is a little more nuanced. There are workers' rights. Now, here is a ridiculous example. I know you have heard this before. Right to vacation with pay. Now, that sounds very European to me. Right to vacation with pay. If you tell a domestic worker, you have a right to vacation with pay. If you tell a waste picker, you have a right to vacation with pay, they'll laugh at it, because their experiences of life and their context of work do not match with this so-called formulated workers' rights. Therefore, the second agenda that I think ILO should think about in the next 100 years is how to formulate entitlements that is more attentive to situated experiences of workers and goes beyond what has been known as traditional workers' rights. And if we are able to reformulate our understanding of work as distinguished from employment, we would also be able to take account of the interrelationship between environment and work. Now, I'm pretty sure many of you know that we are in a new geological era called Anthropocene, which means that it is a recognition that after the glacial age, we are now living in a new age, which is shaped by human interaction and nature. And work constitutes the fundamental human interaction, human activity. And therefore, if we conceptualize work beyond its standard employment relationship, we also could find ways to identify those interactions where work relates to environment and nature in general. And I'll leave it at that and could come back to address one of these points in the consecutive discussions. Two other things that I would mention before I hand over the mic is how trade unions would engage with this world of work. Now, one of the advantages that the International Labour Organization has is tripartism. But today, that is also turning out to be one of the disadvantages if you do not see tripartism as a much broader idea of interaction between governments, workers in general, and the employers. It cannot be constrained or restrained within a collective bargaining framework anymore. So the tripartism has to be seen in a much broader light. And in this context, I have coined a phrase called workers' aggregations, where, as you mentioned today morning, workers needs to broaden their ideas, trade union needs to broaden their agendas, and several of the trade unions, including ITUC, have broadened their ideas in order to integrate non-traditional workers into their frame of reference. Finally, taking 30 seconds, I'd like to talk about the role of ILO. I see the role of ILO in the next 100 years as leader in ideas. Because ILO cannot implement law, ILO cannot enforce law. To me, that's very much a job of people who are engaged in their particular activities, engaged in their work. So the way ILO can make a difference is by leading in ideas and offering ways how to achieve those ideas. With those opening remarks, I'll close my things.
Thank you, Supiri. I think that, you definitely were provocative towards some of our thinking, as much as, and I was thinking in terms of the ILO, as a universal body in any case, where you do have all the, the tripartite representation, the universal tripartite representation. And I think also that, it's like how do, expand rights. I think that as much as certain things are not yet available, but your idea, I think, of workers with rights and entitlements is going towards, I think, what is the vision of the ILO of making sure that we have a universal, level playing field. But I want to go, first of all, continuing this discussion, to Tunzi Wawa, that is president of the employers group of the ILO governing body, but also, coming from South Africa, and, which is his reflection in this stage, also considering what was discussed before during the morning. Thank you, Tunzi.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon to colleagues. It's very rare, I think, that one gets an opportunity to sit on the same panel with his former professor, Professor Eddie Webster. I have to keep reminding him every time I see him, because I wasn't a particularly bright student, but I made up for it by being very naughty. I majored in industrial sociology, so he was my professor at Wits, my first degree.
How can I forget?
Yeah? And we used to talk about the motor industry and the industrial reserve army of unemployed people, and we used to talk about the alienation of the worker, and so on and so on. I still remember some of the concepts. I think, for me, not because he was my professor, I want to start by saying I start from a very different position. I cannot agree with a view that says the future of work is bleak. I cannot. I mean, it doesn't work for me. because it's just not in terms of my phraseology and in terms of my positive spirit for life. I do concede, and I'm not going to spend too much time because I've got 5 minutes and I want to focus on my own points. I do concede that there's a lot of problems. We have a lot of problems that have been created by a lot of us, and we need to change them. And I think for me to then say that the future, because today things are bad, the future is going to be bleak, is what in law we would call a non sequitur. It doesn't necessarily follow. Because if then that is the case, then we must accept that we've lost, and then there's no reason we are sitting here today and trying to come up with solutions. Because I see my being here today as being part of the solution for the future. We need to be able, as the DG says, we need to be able to craft and come up with the future we want. But I would say that for us to come up with the future we want, we need to be very decisive. We cannot do what we've done in the past and continue to sit back and talk a lot and have a lot of rhetoric but not act. I think that's where I would like to start. The second thing I'd like to say is that I'm happy when a professor, because, you know, these days I'm surrounded by professors. I also chair the University of the Western Cape, Professor Webster. So I used to be very intimidated by professors until I sat there. And now I've learned to accept that professors are very good colleagues I must listen to. And when the assistant professor Supriya says something I've been thinking about for a long time, I tend to think, okay, so then I can't be so out of order. Because I've been concerned about the fact that our framework or our reference point is always very Eurocentric. We always think that we need to come up with standards that are based somewhere else. And yet you see that some of these have been okay. But the majority of them are, in my view, the reason some of the policies have failed in some of the areas because of the heterogeneity that we are talking about. So I'll come back later in the discussion. So I want to just focus on my points. And my point of departure, Anna, starts as well from the inequality point of view and so on. And one of the things I want to preface is that we all need a huge attitudinal change and a huge change to do things differently, because we've seen how the past failures of policies has brought us to where we are as far as I'm concerned. Somebody said we need to update policies earlier on in the first session. All policies, fiscal policies and what have you. And I'm with that as well. I do think that I want to share at least 5 areas that for us we believe as employers need to be an area that we must prioritize amongst other things that we do. We need a lot of ambition in our educational policies, huge, huge ambition. The education sector should work much more closely with businesses and workers' organizations to ensure that programs are continuously updated according to real business needs. This is very often not the case due to inexplicable prejudices and obsolete frameworks that we have. We clearly risk not being able, for example, to count on enough skilled STEM specialists who will make a difference to attract investment and create new job opportunities in the future. I think another one is the point where I pick it up all the time, everywhere I've been with the G20, I picked it up in China, I picked it up in Germany, that we say that vocational training is the way to go now in terms of some of the skills that we have. But we are not moving as fast as we can because all of us, including me, have a problem with attitudes. Because when we think vocational training, we think less than. Status orientation says must be university. So we all say, yes, we need a vocational training until it is your child. When it is my child, all of a sudden I say, well, okay, somebody else, but not my child. And these are things we need to question, we need to interrogate very seriously. There are those who also say we need a greater emphasis in the humanities and the arts, because we need what is now referred to as T-shaped individuals for flexibility. And this is also something we need to look at. I'm happy that I was in the arts, as I said, that the professor was my lecturer in industrial sociology, so I hope I can be able to demonstrate some flexibility going forward. But when we talk about creativeness, we talk about innovation, we talk about communication capacities, amongst others, these are critical. Institutions, therefore, and international organizations like the ILO should provide more real-time, holistic, and dynamic information and data of employable skills for the future. Policies should be quickly modernized and remodeled in a coherent manner to shift from stimulating not only formal ways of learning, but also accessible, informal, and online ways of updating competencies. The second one for us is that the previous economic crisis has shown us how critical it is to avoid structural unemployment to enable job transitions and mobility. Before disruptive changes in labor law markets arise, we need to assure effective and smooth transition pathways. And this, again, was referred to in the first session that we had. The word just was used, the just transition. I mean, again, that is absolutely spot on. Active labor market policies need to work better at measuring the effectiveness thereof, and impact will be critical. Public institutions are often too reluctant to properly assess its real impact. Again, there was an issue, I think, about, I can't remember if it was Sharon who raised it, about regulation, that regulation might be necessary. Indeed, it might be. But the only difference that I would like to say is that I'm sick and tired of regulation without doing what we call RIAs, doing your regulatory impact assessments. Regulatory impact assessments are critical because we simply just do things and add and add and add and pile things up, and then we end up with a mess of rigidity, then that doesn't help. And then we don't do a post-legislation passing effectiveness measure. And then we don't see that things are getting worse instead of getting better because of the very regulations that we are passing. The third one, even though the digital economy will bring huge new opportunities, it will not be a magic formula. The digital economy also requires a strong analog foundation of regulations and institutions that create a vibrant climate to create jobs and growth. In many developed and developing countries, we're still far from modernizing regulatory frameworks, including fighting against corruption or looking at obsolete employment regulations and administrative regulations. I mean, when I heard somebody talking about the politics that are behind policies, I can't remember called it frozen policies, I couldn't help but think about South Africa, Eddie. South Africa has a huge corruption challenge right now. Yesterday, our president simply just reshuffled his government for the third time, I think in, 12 months or 15 months, just because he wants to make sure that corruption can be good for him and for some of his people. And these are the things that we need to be addressing. Those are the things we need to be addressing, the politics behind that keep us in this situation and we cannot move on. And the poor continue to be poorer all the time. I can tell you stories and stories. I come from a rural village. I went to see my mother 4 weeks ago. She did not have water for 5 weeks because of a burst pipe, allegedly. I had to phone the guy myself on my way here to say, come on, I mean, this is too much now. I'm going to write a letter to the president. I'm going to do this. The water was flowing yesterday morning. Now, why should it be that I must know somebody who knows somebody for services to be given to me? How is that? And I said to him, I don't understand. I said, my mother may be struggling with water, but at least she has a car. What about the rest of the village where people don't even have a wheelbarrow to go and pick up a 20 liter of water? These are the realities. It's failure to deliver. It's failure to execute very basic things that we need to do. The fourth one, we also need a proper assessment of how the digital economy is developing and how it is affecting employment. We do need a proper assessment. At the moment, we are very speculative. It's very speculative conjecture. We don't have proper facts and proper evidence to be able to assess exactly what it is we're going to be talking about. But some evidence will show that whilst, yes, some jobs will be lost. The percentages, there's various percentages depending on what studies you're looking at. But if you look at the past trends, you'll also be able to attest to the fact that technology has also been responsible for creating new jobs. So we must talk about the quantum. Maybe it's a discussion of quantum and whatever you, and not simply that it will simply just erode all jobs. And based on a proper analysis, we can take a fresh look at existing frameworks, including social protection systems, which is absolutely, absolutely key. And perhaps we need the courage to explore new ways to support individuals who will need better coverage without creating strains on sustainability or in creating unnecessary costs. The last point is, for me, what is the role of governments and social partners in this context? We will be discussing this, or colleagues will discuss this in my absence, I've seen from the program, but I thought let me just say something about it. We obviously have to preserve social dialogue as a precious tool. It's critical for us, which is being contested by some interested voices we've heard. Social dialogue can make a difference when anticipating the future. It can provide social stability, but can also help to ensure common sense and down-to-earth solutions. To do that, we need to have courage and a sense of responsibility. We do not need to reinvent social dialogue, but we need to look at it with fresh eyes. I think I'll stop there for now, Anna, because I'm worried about time, and then pick up on some of these ideas later in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tunsi. And then actually, I think that, a lot of things came already, the agreement, the agreement on policies and no, I have this one. So it should work, I hope. Because I wanted to see the people, they are behind, so I asked for the microphone, otherwise I look at my own nameplate. And I want to go straight to you, Kathleen Pasquier, that just became, as Tunsi, also the spokesperson for and the president of the full workers group in the ILO governing body, besides your role in the Netherlands. And what is your take of this discussion and the way forward? Thank you.
First of all, let me say I really appreciate a bit of the provocative bluntness of the discussion. I think it's very necessary. Let me start to say that 2 weeks ago I was in Vietnam, and there we had a gender forum, which was organized by the Fair Wear Foundation and its partners, the trade unions, but also the ILO Training Center. And there were brands also there, and we were discussing the developments in the garment sector all over Southeast Asia. So that's Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Cambodia, Myanmar, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc. And what was striking was all the stories that people told about real-life working conditions in the garment industry. And that is also a bit of a response already to people that say we are discussing standards that are Europe originating and are European-centered and would not be relevant to other parts of the world. I would say there's quite a number of standards, especially originating in the very beginning of the ILO, dealing with the 19th century situations in, of course, Western European and other factories, etc., that are still of major relevance to workers around the world, everywhere. The mines in Latin America, the factories in Southeast Asia, these are producing according to realities that if you would make a film of them and you would change the faces from Asian faces to European faces, it would show a 19th century factory with 16 hours of work per day, child labor, no protection of women going to their jobs, and no possibilities for toilet breaks, you name it, and a lot of violence in the workplace. That's not to say that there is not also other realities in the same country. I've seen a lot of street vendors in the streets of Hanoi, lots of women, and they are supplementing a very poor family income with their husbands still working in agriculture. So that's all taking place in the world of work today. And I think when we discuss the world of work of tomorrow, we first need to have a realistic picture of today's world of work and all the challenges to decent work that exist all over the globe. And they are of a very different nature in many places. But I think when we don't do anything about the current challenges, we will see the new developments exacerbate current inequalities. That's between men and women, that's between the developed and the developing world. It's also between the rich and poor in the developed and in the developing world. And there is a lot of old-fashioned realities out there that require what some people would call old-fashioned responses. If you have to address a 60 to 80 hours working week, you need something about maximum work hours. You need to deal with the fact that a lot of the women working in those factories also have children that they have to take care of, etc., etc. The nowadays challenges are also that increasingly the workforce is female, and we have never solved the problem of the work-care-family nexus. There is an enormous amount of threats to health and safety that require all our instruments to be effective and up to date, and that's something that we have recently also discussed in the standard review mechanism
debate that we had in September. But all those things happening are part and parcel of modern business models. It's not like, oh, they forgot to change and we are now modern. This is all part and parcel of the globalized model of production. And indecent working conditions at the end of the chain are part of the change business model. So what we also see is that modern technology is used, or I could also say abused, to do the vanishing trick of the employer-employee relationship. So we see a lot of control somewhere up the chain, and the control is not translated into a relation of responsibility. The old-fashioned, if you could say so, employer-employee relationship is there in a situation where often the official employer doesn't have any power to influence the working conditions. That could be an SME, it could be an intermediary, a labor broker. The real power is somewhere higher, and somewhere higher they say, oh, but these people are not our workers, we are not responsible. This is the debate that we are currently addressing in all the discussions on the global supply chains. So the issue here is, how do we ensure that responsibility is taken? And we have said on several occasions on the trade union side, stop hiding your responsibilities, start taking on the responsibility. How do we really ensure that the benefits of technological change are equally shared and not costs dumped on developing countries? And I remember very well a South African professor, another South African professor, who said, we always think about technology as something clean and nice. But what happens when your robots die? Will you bury them in Africa? Because, yeah, this is what we currently do with a lot of new technology. The ship breaking is taking place somewhere else. All the niceties are shown, let's say, on the top and maybe in the developing world, but even the developed world. But even there already we see some bleak features, and I would say quite bleak, of what could happen if we don't ensure that responsibility is taken for the good and also the bad sides of all the developments that we see in the area of technology. So if we don't do anything, and there I do agree with Mr. Webster, we will see more and more workers with less negotiating power end up in informal work arrangements as task rabbits, as it's called sometimes in the US, competing with each other. And actually the laughing third, as we say in my country, the laughing third is business, and especially the ones that make a lot of profit, not necessarily the smaller businesses. And we all talk about social protection floors that maybe could help a little bit to rebalance, but who is going to pay for them if we do not tax the rich? And I was quite happy to see that even the IMF is now saying, well, maybe it's gone too far. Maybe we should stop giving all these benefits to the higher, those higher up. They should contribute. And also companies that are very worried about factory fires in Bangladesh are the same ones often that say, we want a tax reduction when we come to your country. Now, who is then going to pay for the labor inspectorates that need to go into the factories to find out if things are okay all over there? As I said in the beginning, there is this very strong gender dimension to a lot of the developments that we see. Our societies and workplaces have dramatically changed because of women entering the labor market. And in my view, we cannot talk about women at work as an add-on to the future of work. The future of work will be very much determined in terms of if we are able and capable of understanding how it looks like when really women are there on an equal footing in terms of numbers, and what then needs to change in terms of our policies to make sure that they are also seen as equal partners and equal, that they are equally protected in all our systems. And equal doesn't mean the same as we did before, because it's not like let's make women as if they were men. It means that we have to look again at the whole system of protection and standards indeed to see if women and men are protected to deal with the world of work of today. Are unions old-fashioned? in terms of, oh, let's just think about a different system of sharing, contributing. I'm the first one to always say that unions need to cooperate very strongly with civil society organizations, but at the same time, it's very important to understand the difference between unions and the way they are reflected also in the institutions that we have developed over the last 100 years, and other organizations. And also in Vietnam, we had a discussion with very, very important, I would say, labor NGOs trying to reach out to workers that are very difficult to reach, and sometimes difficult to reach because a factory prohibits a union to be active in the factory. And we agreed that it is very important to see the complementarity of roles rather than to say that there should be a replacement, because not for nothing, freedom of associations at the heart of the ILO. It's still a key issue that people can sit down together and debate how to address an issue with solidarity and collectivity. And of course, there is a lot of organizations that have developed very innovative ways to do that. It's also important that they can develop into real unions so that they can have the negotiating possibilities and can or negotiate binding agreements with employers, and that it is enshrined in law and practice at the national and international level how to protect those possibilities. So I would say let's be very careful and let's at the same time be also very audacious. We need to address the fact that it is increasingly difficult rather than easy to unionize and organize. And we need everybody to be active, and we need to take on board a lot of other initiatives. And at the same time, we need to protect very strongly the freedom of association, the way it has been developing in the ILO also, and the position of unions to address the issues of workers. And we need also, of course, to ask unions to take those challenges up and to modernize. And we have seen quite a number of interesting experiences, and I've learned a lot, to be honest, from unions in the developing world, that because of the very dire situation they were in, they were also developing very interesting responses in new ways of organizing. Now, maybe the final point I would like to make is is still work a meaningful principle? This is the house of work. And then sometimes people, and I have sometimes the impression out of desperation, say, oh, let's stop focusing so much on work. Let's develop a basic income, or let's develop something else. And then when I go to many different places, I always see how important for individuals work is. Work is value, it's dignity, it's influence, it's the possibility to provide for yourself and your family. It's very difficult to imagine anything else that could have the same role. At the same time, we should not underestimate that work gives you an entry point to power and influence. And work, try to imagine who will decide on the surpluses created by the economy or by technological change if you're not part of the story. If you cannot say, well, this profit that's made needs to go to me as well. This is the amount of money that we want to put into social protection. Where will you be at the table if you are not present in that world where value is created and surpluses are created? So I would like to finalize with a few remarks only on, I think already made my remarks. I'll not respond in this stage to Mr. Batunzi, and only want to finish with the fact that I think already this morning several people say the future of work is in our hands. It's basically political choices. It's the future of work we want, and how are we going to bring that together? We've said a lot of things about ourselves, as unions also. Maybe my last word would be about what do I expect from employers and governments. From employers, and again, also in Vietnam, that discussion was taking place with brands and companies taking responsibility. I think it's very important that we start addressing all the elephants in the room. One of the elephants in the room is the discussion on non-standard forms of employment. It's never been my term. I don't like it. When I was discussing the position of women in the labor market, I could say, well, what they do is standard. It's standard for women. But at the same time, it was a solution to address an elephant in the room because we never were allowed to talk about precarious work and about all the insecure work. And I think this is one of the elephants that we have to address in the ILO. We must address that there is a difference between secure and insecure work, that there is precarious work out there, and that we need to take responsibility for that, including the new challenges on platform. The other elephant is the role of regulation. I think there is a lot of regulation for the last 150 years that has benefited business. There is a very wrong understanding that regulation is for workers and deregulation for employers. I think we need to get to a new agreement that there is a lot of regulation that would serve both, and some forms of regulation need to be updated and modernized, and in general, markets cannot thrive without regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I will try to give 1 minute to everybody at the end in the reverse order. So, you know, but I want to give the floor now to Fayed, le secrétaire général adjoint de l'UGTT Tunisie, qui est ici. Et naturellement, vous vous rappelez.
Yes, and naturally you will be discussing the fact that the Tunisian General Labour Union also received the Nobel Peace Prize for its organization of Tunisian society, and I'd like to ask you to reflect on the discussion we've had today. Thank you. You have the floor.
معذرة سأتحدث بالعربية.
I will be speaking in Arabic, Madam.
You can listen to.
صباح الخير للجميع.
Good morning to all. I would like to thank the organizers of this meeting. Among the 4 elements, the principal themes regarding work and society, irregardless of the origin or level of work and society, work is of concern to all around the world, and it is perfectly fitting that the International Labour Organization take a supervisory role in this area in order to study issues relative to the future of work and of workers. It is perfectly fitting that the ILO become a leader in this conversation, whether we are referring to governments, heads of state. It is workers that are the pillars of production and the tools of production, and governments are both employers and intermediaries. Quite often, they set up various regulatory initiatives. So, it is necessary in the course of our evaluation that we not ignore this. We need to take a complementary, participatory approach. Everyone must be involved in this conversation so that we can all solve a number of issues facing us and manage to face the many changes underway. It's impossible for one participant in this conversation to treat another with disdain or ignore another. We must work together to determine the future of work. This is why we have called for national dialogue and have endowed it with a vital role. This is not only a question of governments participating, but civil society having its voice heard in cooperation among all interested parties. This has led us to a period of stability, but this was also thanks to the social dialogue. The 4 pillars regard development, decent work, employment and work policies, and another principal pillar, which is social protection. This is quite important. We must try to arrive at creating a world of work in future which is entirely governed by these 4 or 5 pillars that I've just referred to. There must be dialogue. This dialogue must take place between all parties, governments, employers, and workers, and this must take place under the aegis of the International Labour Organization and its governing body. And this is why we have created a supervisory body which manages all of these various aspects. There must be a number of meetings. Recently, there were meetings to determine strategies, and we have arrived at an agreement which has led us to the Tunisian program of work. This is a tremendous boost to the world of work and to workers. The people have presided over the National Council in discussing these very important issues. So there is no longer confrontation, there is dialogue and coming together, which is the only way that we will be able to solve issues in the world of work, not only in Tunisia, but around the world. And this requires the participation of all social partners and the entirety of the international community. As you all know, this was done in 2015, and we will be celebrating this in 2019. Now we have challenges facing us. In certain countries, there are challenges that are more or less pointed and different priorities as a result. And the priority that we place on these challenges is dependent on our consideration of globalization, which has not caused governments to abandon their role in ensuring social protection, education, transport, and other services. It's since 1986, since my country entered the market economy, there has been an attempt to limit public spending and open possibilities to the private sector. In fact, certain customs changes were made and duties were decreased in order to protect trade and the economy, and this has enriched traditional industries. This was very important. These reforms were vital for us, and they led the government to limit its interference in certain areas. Now, at the beginning, some Tunisians considered that these activities were not a good idea, and they in fact led us to what happened last 14th January. We must not only focus on the future, we must also focus on today. 54% of Tunisians are working in the informal sector. However, they pay taxes, and we have a deficit. 25% is the average unemployment rate in Tunisia. This is a situation we are facing, and it is clearly linked to terrorism, which is certainly one of the greatest dangers that our society faces. We must try to find solutions in order to improve the situation of those who are marginalized. We must find a way to ensure a certain homogeneity. We must ensure the observance of a minimum wage. This is not a simple dialogue for Tunisians, the guarantee of a minimum wage or salary. It's very important for the economy as well. Allow me.
Okay.
Merci, excusez-nous parce qu'on a commencé.
Thank you very much, says the moderator. We began quite late. I would like to apologize for cutting you off, but I'd like now to give the floor to Karen Nussbaum and then do a tour de table. And thank you to the interpreters for this as well.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, colleagues. I'll be very brief. I agree with so many of our speakers that that how work is distributed and whether it's valued is a matter of public policy. And the question is really whether workers will be represented with power in that discussion. Now, I bring a perspective that I understand I come from a country that is now considered not normative in ILO speak, that our government no longer operates within the normal boundaries. And so my perspective is as an outlier, perhaps, but from my country, the way it looks is that the falling union density, the smaller number of union members, the degradation of work, and the rise of the right are all very intimately connected. And that these trends are all centered on the same fundamental debate, and that is whether individuals are better off on their own, that the only deal you can make is as an individual, or whether there is strength in numbers, which is to say collective power. Now, I would say to the world community that if you don't want more non-normative governments, that we address this fundamental debate and make it in the interests of collective power, not individual power. To that end, I want to just give you one example from my country where we are trying to do new kinds of organizing that address this fundamental philosophical problem which operates at a very big scale. I'm from an organization called Working America. We call this the community affiliate of the AFL-CIO, which is the Trade Union Federation. We started 15 years ago because we saw the falling power of unions, and that we have to go out to the community to talk to all workers about this fundamental divide. Are you on your own, or is there collective power? But around the questions of good jobs, a fair economy, and a just democracy. We refer to ourselves as the union for people who do not have a union on the job. We knock on doors. We have organizers. Our organizers go out to knock on the doors of people. We have 3 million members and supporters, all of them people who do not have a union on the job. Now, this includes, for example, people who voted for Trump. Very many people who voted for Trump are in our organization. These people are not ideologues. They are struggling with what I would agree is a bleak future. And in the terms of standard versus non-standard work, they are looking at literally a future that has no standard jobs for themselves or for their children. And this is terribly disorienting. and we've seen the consequences. But half of those Trump voters believe that there should be stronger unions in our country. So we've got people who are struggling with divided ways of understanding the world. And it is our job as the trade union movement and as organizers to lead them in the right direction. Right now, our model includes knocking on the doors of union members. And then we call this make every conversation count. So in any community, we can talk to a union member, get them to recommit to their union, and agree to move to a dues platform that is directly to the union, not through the employer, to give the unions greater power, and to make additional contributions beyond their dues to the political activities of their union. And at the doors where there aren't union members, we talk about the issues that labor cares about, and we build public support to build political power. This works to change elections, it works to build unions, and it also creates the bridge to new forms of organization that we will need as a trade union movement to represent the new forms of workers. Let me just close by saying that the forms of worker organization may change and will undoubtedly change, but they must retain the fundamental value that they are organizations owned by the members. There is no substitute by NGOs for unions in the social dialogue. We must have organizations that are owned by the members through their payment of dues and the governance of the organizations. How we get there, the new forms, builds on strengthening current collective bargaining so that we have a platform for then addressing the needs of informal workers, freelance workers, digital workers, and so on. But the fundamentals of worker power have to be, are in the interests of all the parties in the social dialogue, or else we'll have even more extreme forms of representation and inequality in our future.
Many thanks, Karen. Unfortunately, I had only a few minutes given by the interpreters, and I cannot go for another round that I wanted to do just with a few words. But I'm sure that we will continue this discussion. You know, this was the opening, and all of you who will stay will also rediscuss. I personally found the fact that even though there were different voices, and we will continue certainly with Supriya about the role of the ILO and the standards and the universality of standards, which to me is still the added value of this organization, how they come on and how they enforce. It's another thing, but I think that Brother Fayed, also spoke about the importance of the ILO to supervise the standards. I think that all the voices that we had wanted to go towards a future where the policies, as we had before, have the value. Social protection is there, social protection that involves also larger entitlements, but also the collective voice, the voice of the actors, the voice of the workers. And we had before also, solutions that were coming indeed from Latin America that are not necessarily the European styles, but everybody needs to say, how do we put the dignity of work, how do we put the workers' rights in a way that they can function? I think we have started a very interesting morning. I think the continuation of this dialogue and in between formal and informal session in the 2 days will be extremely exciting. Thank you very much. Thanks again to those who participated, and let's continue the dialogue in the next session. Thank you. Prego, caro. Now we want the photo.
With my professor. Who's going to take the photo? Mohammed, please come take us a photo with my friend.
It shows that what you taught me wasn't all bad. Yeah.
Okay, so
Oh, yes, you ended on a good. So we didn't have enough time to come back. I wasn't saying that idea. That's what I was going to say.
works with you? Okay, but we can go. Ah, see you. Like you, I other ways.
I'll come back. Yeah, I won't leave. Stop doing it for you. No, no, no. No, I'll come back. One way or the other. Even if I come back just to do that, I'll come back. Okay.
No, but then you had a few words about because that's only the title. I have no problem. It's just that it would be nice to them. Thank you. Not for this, you don't. But we don't need to go.
Guarda, io non tengo ninguna delle mie mallette, spero che stanno dall'altra parte.
È venuta bene? Sì. Siamo i colleghi magri?
Capito? Che ho mandato a dire già, dice no, non te lo do perché ho i colleghi magri. Questo pomeriggio loro hanno i colleghi magri in 3 ore, ok? Se passi le 3 ore ti fanno conoscere. Allora me l'ho messa d'accordo stamattina, dico va bene sono qua, però ci sa la fotografia e questo pomeriggio sono fuori. Quindi in realtà io volevo. No, secondo me è anche necessario, guarda, perché se no poi ci si dice ci si dà ragione, no? Ritiro la parola giustamente da vedere la maternità con il suo piede, perché giustamente al finale la mujer nel paese allora después non puoi votare però al finale cioè, non è che la mujer è dipendente che non può cosa parler avec, oui, il m'a écrit que c'est il a dit qu'il va arriver le même temps. Moi, je voulais voir Lionel, parce que moi, honnêtement, j'avais dans la tête une autre Ah oui, tu l'as, on peut échanger. Oui, oui, transfert. Oui, oui. Mais lui, il est sûr qu'il va venir. Oui, oui, il m'a écrit.